What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I am so honored to have back on the show once again LDS Abuse whistleblower, survivor, an investigative researcher, journalist, and reporter, creator of LDS Abuse, excommunicated, lifelong member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, loving father, nature lover, and a man on a mission to help members of the spiritual body known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints know what to expect from their church if they become victims of abuse. Justin Riggs, aka LDS Abuse. In case you're new here, or if you missed any of Justin's previous episodes, here is a quick recap to catch you all up. In the quiet corridors of history and the hidden vaults of institutional records, Justin has become a singular voice for truth. What began as personal curiosity about how good people could fail victims of abuse quickly evolved into a rigorous, evidence-based mission. Justin immersed himself in the historical record, constructing detailed timelines. He pored over the 1990 PACE Memo, a leaked internal document revealing that church leadership had been monitoring ritualistic child abuse for years, yet never warning parents or addressing the crisis publicly. Through careful analysis of depositions, family research records, and court filings, he has traced multi-generational abuse patterns, most poignantly in his own extended family, the Grant Woolsey line, where allegations spanning 4 generations surfaced in defamation lawsuits and public records. Justin's research extends far beyond individual cases. He shares these findings not as speculation, but as a public archive of evidence, resource pages, research timelines, family trees, and data visualizations that empower others to see the patterns for themselves. This relentless pursuit of documentation came at great personal cost. Justin's work led to his excommunication from the church, yet he continues, driven by the conviction that sunlight is the best disinfectant and that secrets only allow abuse to metastasize. His research has connected the dots between ritual abuse allegations, historical infiltration efforts, and the LDS Corporation's prioritization of brand protection, revealing a system where victims are funneled into therapy modalities that undermine legal recourse, where even the prophets and apostles have been implicated in shielding perpetrators. Justin stands as a model of intellectual courage and moral clarity. Through painstaking research, he has transformed private pain into public knowledge, given voice to the voiceless, and offering a roadmap for accountability. His life's work reminds us that truth is not found in blind loyalty, but in the patient, fearless examination of evidence and patterning. In an age of institutional opacity, Justin has chosen the harder path: to document, to educate, and to speak the truth out loud, so that future generations may break the chains of silence and build something safer, truer, and more just. What makes Justin truly inspiring is not just the research or the courage to expose his own family's pain. It's the profound humanity beneath the fire. He carries righteous anger for the victims, especially the children, but refuses to dehumanize even the perpetrators. The gospel provides for repentance, he says, while acknowledging that most abusers do not repent and that justice must come. He speaks of chain breakers, families who stop the cycle, and he believes in a God of both justice and mercy. He weeps with survivors, fights alongside them, and extends grace even when it comes at a personal cost. He's living proof that one man, armed with truth and an unbreakable commitment to the vulnerable, can shift the Overton window. He has turned personal trauma into collective awakening. He has transformed whispers into documented history. He has modeled what it means to be a true disciple, not blind obedience, but fierce love that protects the innocent and vulnerable. He's not merely a survivor advocate. He's a researcher whose dedication to facts has become a beacon of hope for all who seek the light in the darkness. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming back today's guest of honor, writer, creator, business owner, and content creator, survivor and whistleblower, survivor and victim advocate, voice for the voiceless, courageous warrior, passionate purveyor of truth, and institutional lie detector and dismantler, the one, the only, Justin Riggs, aka LDS Abuse. Justin, it's an honor to have you back. Thank you for being here again today.
Oh man, Emma, like I need to hire you as my PR person. That intro makes me sound so much better than I actually am. No, thank you. I'm really excited to be here today, and just listening to that summary, it's amazing how much of that applies to the story that we're going to be talking about today. And so I'm really excited. This is a case that it really does go directly to the top of the church, literally to the prophet of the church covering for an abuser. And it really does show sort of the institutional aspect of this too, because we're going to talk about how a lot of these leaders in the church were part of quasi-religious organizations in addition to being members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And we're going to sort of see how that plays out inside of an abuse case. And so I'm really grateful for that introduction. Today, we're going to be talking about a man by the name of Gordon Bowen. So for those who have not been following along on my X feed or seen anything about this, Gordon Bowen is a world famous advertising executive. For those who are of my age, you will remember American Express commercials where they say membership has its privileges. And that was Gordon Bowen's campaign, which was like the campaign of the decade, I think, or something like that. He's done work for Coca-Cola. He's done work for Marriott. He's done work for Verizon. He just got inducted into the American Advertising Federation Hall of Fame a couple weeks ago. And the person who interviewed him for that was his good friend, Mitt Romney. So we're talking about some very, very powerful people inside of the LDS church here, because unfortunately, Gordon Bowen is also an abuser. Okay. And we're going to talk about that. He was also an abuse victim, like in most cases, as we always talk about. And so, like you mentioned, like we don't want to demonize Gordon Bowen, although the things that Gordon Bowen has allegedly done are really horrific, like on a very bad scale. But we do want to acknowledge his own pain and the abuse that he claims that he suffered. And so, as always, like I want to show people, I don't want to just sit here and talk about it. I really want to document this for people so that they can see. And so I'm going to go ahead and share out my screen, and we're going to talk about some of the sources that we're using. So the way that I became aware of Gordon Bowen was through an anonymous person who reached out to me. But once they reached out, I immediately went to this video down here. Then put out a video called Satanic Child Sex Abuse. And he has a picture of Mitt Romney, Gordon Bowen, and M. Russell Ballard. And for those who are interested, you can see this is a picture of Lynn Packer himself. Lynn is a very well-respected, and at least inside of the church, a very famous investigative reporter. He's had a very long career. And this Gordon Bowen story that he was doing was actually part of an expose, like a 30-something part expose that he was doing on Tim Ballard and Operation Underground Railroad. But as part of that story, he tells this part of it about Gordon Bowen. Okay. As part of this story, Lynn Packer was working as not just an investigative reporter, but as a trial consultant with Gordon Bowen's ex-wife, whose name is Barbara Bowen, or Barbara Timothy. And during that divorce case, the records were all sealed, okay? And Lynn Packer refused to sign the NDAs that everybody else had to sign. And so he dropped all of these files up at the University of Utah in a collection. And about maybe a year into this, somebody found that collection, and they actually made copies of all of the documents. And so what I've done is I've created this website called Gordon Bowen Court Documents that everybody can go to. And I've just put all the documents up here, okay? I'm going to go through this site very quickly for everybody, because I do think, not everybody can go to the University of Utah, but everybody can go to the internet. And so for those who are interested in this topic, I would highly encourage you to go to Gordon Bowen, courtdocuments.com. And so what we're talking about today are allegations of immoral, unethical, and illegal behavior. And the question, why is the Mormon Church hiding the fact that they are employing and have employed for the last 40 years a sexual predator? Okay, repeatedly, they've paid him millions of dollars to do work for the church. So on the website, I have all the documents. These are all the documents that Lynn Packer put out. Lynn did reach out to me and point out that these are not all court documents. And so I want to be clear that that is true. There are some court documents, but all the documents were in preparation to go to court for Barbara Bowen's divorce case. And then there was also a civil case that was going to be filed alleging child abuse at the hands of Gordon Bowen. I went ahead and went to the trouble of doing some video recordings. And so this is just me reading some of the parts of the documents. So if people want to go to the site, but they don't want to spend time plowing through all the documents, you can sort of see some of the things that Gordon Bowen has done. So we have, in which Gordon Bowen attempts to seduce a young gay employee as part of the documents, in which Dr. Victor Klein evaluates Bowen's mental health, in which Ken Kennitzer describes being molested by Gordon Bowen. So in addition to his children, there are multiple men who have accused Gordon Bowen of sexually assaulting them. Okay. We have in which Gordon Bowen uses the name of a general apostle. That's actually not the way I'm supposed to say that. It would be a general authority or an apostle to get coworkers to stay overnight at his house. In which Gordon Bowen purposely walked in on a naked Michael McLean at his apartment. So for those who are LDS, you'll recognize the name Michael McLean. He was a very famous singer, songwriter, and author for the church for many, many years. And Michael McLean tells this story about how Gordon Bowen invited him to take a shower in his apartment and then walked in on him as he was getting out of the shower. In which Gordon Bowen gets fired from Sundance for paying for porn on the company card. So people get the idea, right? I've just done a bunch of these readings to give people an idea of the kind of man that we're talking about. I also have an entire page about the cover-up, which we're going to talk about, because now that we've begun to advertise the fact that Gordon Bowen is claiming to continue to do work for the church, there have been cover-up attempts, but we'll talk about that here in a second. And then we have a take action page, and it's been really rewarding with the help of some other people, especially a group called Zion Media. We've been able to get some good publicity on this story, and people have actually taken the opportunity to call the church office building and to write letters or take this template letter that I've provided and send it to church leaders. And we've got responses that we're going to look at today, which is pretty exciting because it's very rare to have that kind of thing happen. So that gives everybody sort of a background on who Gordon Bowen is. What I'd like to do to start today is to go through some of these parts of these documents just to give people a better idea of the types of things that are going on. But a little bit of backstory is probably in order. So Gordon Bowen began working for a company called Bonneville Communications in the 1980s. Bonneville Communications is owned by the Church of Jesus Christ, owned and operated by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Although at this point they may have divested, I'm not really sure. But at the time, it was definitely owned and operated by the church. And Gordon Bowen, during his time at Bonneville Communications, began a pattern that a lot of people testify to. And so this is from the documents, the court preparation documents, and it's referencing an affidavit from Kevin Kelly. So Kevin Kelly worked with Gordon at Bonneville Communications and Ogilvy and Mather in New York. And according to the people preparing this document, Kevin would explain how Gordon's charm and cunning allowed him to have people removed at Bonneville as Gordon took their place, that Gordon had gross abuses with regard to his expense report, spread lies about employees, had threatened Dick Alsop, Gordon's boss. And then Kevin would also explain how Gordon got him and others to follow him to New York to work for Ogilvy. Okay, so the thing that I really want to point out about this particular testimony is that Gordon had gross abuses with regard to his expense report. This is a pattern in Gordon Bowen's life, that he steals money from the companies that he's working for by padding his expense report, but not by like $50 or $100 or $1,000, but to the tune of tens of thousands. And I've heard from people even up to like hundreds of thousands of dollars that he stole from companies, including the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Okay. So what's important about that? Well, if anybody's ever been a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, what you'll know is that the church protects its money far better than it protects its people. Okay, like nothing will get you excommunicated faster from the church than messing with the church's money. And they have unbelievable trainings for people who are handling the church's money. I know that because I was a ward clerk, and so I was responsible for the finances of a local congregation. And I mean, they have all kinds of great world-class systems in place to make sure that their money is taken care of. And so you would expect if a man got fired from a job for padding his expense report and stealing money from the church, that he would be excommunicated for the church for that, and that he would sort of be on the outs with the leaders of the church. But instead, what we see is a man who is working with church leaders very, very closely, even after he is let go for stealing money from the church. Okay. So another part of this is this is talking about people that Gordon Bowen spread lies about and had fired. So let's look at a couple more testimonies about that. So here's another testimony. It says, Gordon was responsible for getting Ross Richins, my boss, fired. Ross was a competent, good leader and a great guy, and his firing was most unfortunate. Gordon climbed the management ladder, and we were given to understand that Gordon was in good standing with general authorities of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Specifically, this says Packard, but it's actually Elder Packer, which is Boyd K. Packer, who was an apostle in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This goes on to say, when Gordon left Bonneville, it was said of him by many in the department at the time that he had single-handedly almost destroyed Bonneville's relationship with the LDS Church. Okay. Another example, this actually has to do with my family. So you mentioned Grant Woolsey. Grant Woolsey's father was Heber Woolsey. And so Heber worked with Gordon Bowen for a little bit of time. And just for everybody, if you haven't seen the show about the Woolseys that I've done, Heber is like my great uncle. I never met him personally, but he worked at the very highest levels of the church with the first presidency of the church in their public relations and communications department. And so at a certain point, he was working with Gordon Bowen. But here's what it says. Heber Woolsey was the head of the public communication department at that time, and John Kinnear was next in line. Gordon used the same process he used at Bonneville by asking around to find their faults and weaknesses and then going to the superiors, particularly Elder Boyd K. Packer, which caused them to be removed. Woolsey went to work at BYU and Kinnear was reassigned to another department. These things happened probably in 1983. Gordon spoke openly, claiming Woolsey and Kinnear were incompetent and that he would be able to get them out of our way through his connections with the general authorities. Once Woolsey and Kinnear were removed, Gordon became the main creative force in the media efforts of the LDS Church. Those of us at Bonneville began questioning Gordon's sincere interest in the church because of his actions, attitude, and things that he said. In particular, Gordon made disparaging comments about the LDS temple ceremony. Okay. And I want people to hold on to that because part of this story is that in 2026, Gordon Bowen is claiming to work for the 2027 Salt Lake Temple Open House. And so what you have here is a man who privately speaks disparagingly about the LDS temple ceremony, but publicly wants to be associated with a project related to the temple. And this is another very common pattern in Gordon Bowen's life where he'll say one thing, but privately his life is completely different than what he's presenting, okay? Let's see. Let's talk about some of the people that Gordon Bowen was working with. So in addition to Elder Packer, Lynn Packer reports, and I should probably note that Lynn Packer is the nephew of Boyd K. Packer. So just to be clear, the investigative reporter covering this story is the nephew, if I'm remembering correctly, of the apostle of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So sort of an uncomfortable situation there where he's having to report on his own family being affiliated and associated with this guy. So, but what Lynn Packer reports is about this letter here. And this letter is from January 17th, 2012. So well after Gordon Bowen had both been fired from the church and excommunicated from the church. but it's from M. Russell Ballard, who's another apostle of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it says, "Dear Gordon, what counsel have you given to the Church Media Advisory Committee in reference to the Mormon Messages Guidebook? If they need help, share your vast experience and insight with them. If you prefer, you can share with me, and I will see that your comments are shared with the right people at the right time." And then he says, "I'm off to Brazil this Thursday. I'll contact you upon my return. Our work on identity moves ever slowly forward, but is still moving." The really critical part about this letter is this last line where he says, "Our work on identity moves ever slowly forward." Okay. So what's sort of unfolded in the last few weeks here, or maybe the last couple months, is what I'm terming a brand war. Okay. The LDS Church has worked very, very hard over the last 40 years to change their public identity from those weird Mormons who practiced polygamy and X, Y, and Z to a family-friendly, led by prophets, full of people with honesty, integrity, and has zero tolerance for abuse. And the thing that's really problematic about this story for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is that what we now know is that the man that they hired to create that identity is an advertising executive who lies, cheats, steals, abuses, and just generally speaking is the exact opposite of the image that the church wants to put out in the world. And so there's going to be a lot of damage to the church's brand if people realize that Gordon Bowen has been working with church leaders for over 40 years now. And so what we have is a brand war, but this is what establishes what Gordon Bowen was doing for the church. He was doing work on identity. Okay. There's another letter that was sent out, and this one's pretty important too. This is a letter from November 1993. And Lynn Packer quotes just this part of it. He says, "Lastly, the more quickly we move away from the term Mormon and proactively become the Church of Jesus Christ, the easier it will be to articulate and defend these positions." And this letter was to Boyd Packer, Russell Ballard, and Gordon Hinckley. The letter was to Boyd Packer, but apparently he was working with Russell Ballard and Gordon Hinckley at the same time, who Gordon Hinckley was the actual prophet of the church, okay, at this time. So what's really critical about this is that for anybody who's a member of the church, what you'll remember is that in 2019, if I remember right after Russell M. Nelson got put in as the prophet of the church, he got up in a general conference and he told the church, we are no longer to use the term Mormon in the church because that's a victory for Satan, according to him. And it wasn't the first time that Russell Nelson had brought this up. He had brought it up earlier, but he had sort of been swatted away by Gordon Hinckley in another talk where Gordon Hinckley said, "Hey, I really appreciate the talk that Russell Nelson gave, but this is a nickname that's been given to us." And Gordon Hinckley went as far to say that Mormon means more good. Okay. And so there's sort of this internal battle in the church regarding the church's identity. And once Gordon Hinckley passes on, Russell Nelson takes Gordon Bowen's recommendation to get away from the term Mormon, and he institutes that as a church policy, basically. And it's not really gone all that well, but it is what it is. Okay. So another church leader that Gordon Bowen was very close to was a member of the First Presidency by the name of James E. Faust. And so what this is referring to is the fact that there were letters written from Barbara. The me in this document is Barbara Timothy Bowen, or Barbara. I'm just going to call her Barbara Timothy at this point because she's been divorced from Gordon Bowen for a long time. So Barbara Timothy was writing letters to President Faust with reference to her marriage and Gordon's dishonest homosexual behavior. So I don't think we've talked about that yet. Gordon Bowen was and is homosexual. And again, for those who don't have context for this, because you're not members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I don't know that there's anything much harder than being a homosexual in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And especially like back in the 80s and that kind of thing. This is the time period when Dallin Oaks, the current prophet of the church, was the president of Brigham Young University. And they were doing experiments on homosexual people at the university by attaching electrodes to their genitals and then flashing pornography on a screen. And if they got an erection, then they would shock this homosexual because they thought that homosexuality could be cured. I mean, and to this day, you have Elder Bednar, David Bednar, who's an apostle of the church, saying that there's no such thing as a homosexual in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The way that they classify these people is that they are same-sex attracted. Okay, so all that to say that Gordon Bowen was pretty tortured about being homosexual, and he believed that he was homosexual for some pretty wild reasons. He thought it had to do with consuming sugar. He thought it had to do with demon possession, evil spirits, evil female spirits that had possessed his body, and so on and so forth. And so I think he was really having a hard time as a member of the church being homosexual. And so he was trying to hide that and mask that. And apparently, if you believe the people that I speak to, the leaders of the church didn't recognize that he's homosexual. I have a very hard time believing that, because we're going to watch a video of Gordon Bowen, and what you'll see is that it's pretty obvious, to me at least, that Gordon Bowen was homosexual. But the official line is that Gordon Bowen deceived these church leaders and they didn't know that he was homosexual. And that's important because this James E. Faust actually was responsible for marrying Gordon Bowen to Barbara Timothy inside the temple, the Salt Lake Temple of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so in addition to that, Gordon Hinckley, the prophet of the church, was pressuring Gordon Bowen to get married. That's another thing that Lynn Packer reports on, is that through M. Russell Ballard, Gordon Hinckley is telling Gordon Bowen, you need to get married. And so Gordon feels this pressure, and he has been in love with this woman, Barbara Timothy, for decades. They went to high school together, and Barbara had a previous marriage. And before she got married, Gordon had begged her not to marry her first husband, but to marry him instead. And she had not done that. So there's so much to this story. So I apologize if I'm bouncing around a little bit, but the basic point is that leaders of the church were pushing Gordon Bowen to get married to a woman, even though he was a homosexual man. And that ends up as a very, very bad situation, because as I mentioned, Gordon Bowen ends up abusing both his stepchildren and his children, according to these documents that we have. Okay. So President Faust definitely knew about what was going on with casting out evil spirits. Gordon Bowen believed that you could heal homosexuality by casting out evil spirits. Indeed, he thought that this therapy was going to cure homosexuality for all the members of the church, and that this was the mission that he had been sent to earth to do. He believed that God was telling him this, and we're going to talk about that because we have copies of Gordon Bowen's journal, or at least parts of Gordon Bowen's journals, in which he is speaking in the voice of God to him. Okay. So that covers several of the people that Gordon Bowen was working with during this time. Now, here's a few really troubling things that the brethren knew about Gordon Bowen over the years that they failed to act upon. Okay. I'm just trying to decide which one I want to start with. I think we'll start with this. So as these letters are being written to President Faust, and then Elder Ballard is also referred to in the Lynn Packer documents as receiving letters from Barbara Bowen, there is this story that comes to light. And Gordon Bowen wrote several pornographic stories. He had sort of, how would you say this? Not a fascination, but almost like a compulsive fixation on penises. He had a subscription to a website that had everything to do with penises. He would write stories about penises. He would tell his coworkers stories about how he was ironing and dropped the iron on his penis, or how he was in the bathtub and I think it was something about a cat like playing with his penis in the bathtub. Anyway, don't want to get into that too much, but he had this unhealthy fixation on this. But there's an even more disturbing story, at least for me as a disciple of Jesus Christ, where Gordon Bowen writes this story called The Holy Dream, which involves a juicy, naked, free of cleaning cloth, engorged Jesus mounting a black horse, wrapping his bare thighs around the hairy mane. The horse says or thinks, I am ready for this eternal rider. Rub me, mount me. And in the story, it seems to infer that Gordon Bowen is the horse that Jesus is mounting. So what we have here is a situation where Gordon Bowen appears to be writing homosexual erotica about Jesus Christ. Okay. that becomes really important because eventually M. Russell Ballard hires Gordon Bowen to create a movie about Jesus Christ and pays him $20 million to do that. So out of all the people in the world that you could hire to make a movie about Jesus Christ, M. Russell Ballard chooses Gordon Bowen, who's writing this homosexual erotica about Jesus Christ, which is really problematic if you want to believe that M. Russell Ballard has discernment and is a special witness of the name of Jesus Christ, which is what the Mormon apostles claim. In addition to that, in Gordon Bowen's journals, pardon me, he writes some really disturbing things. And this is not the journal itself. This is a summary of the journal. And so it's a little bit different because in the journals, what was happening is Gordon Bowen had been instructed by a man named Mel Fish, a therapist, to ask questions, and whatever came to his mind was the voice of God. And so Gordon Bowen would write in his journals, and when he was speaking, he would write in lowercase. And when God was speaking, he would write everything in uppercase. And so what this is this is in lowercase, but in the journal itself, this is actually God speaking to Gordon Bowen. He says, "You are a chosen son. You have been a conduit of evil spirits that are legion, not a few, but battalions sent to destroy your work and works. Your sins were foreordained, so you could learn the secret combinations, words, signs, oaths, and songs. Evil spirits are being weakened in their grasp as the impurities are being flushed from your system." And then here's this part about sugar. "You've got to resist evil, and for you, sugar attracts evil like a magnet." So in case you're not getting the picture here, Gordon Bowen is a pretty troubled individual. And there are actually multiple people in the divorce case, multiple professionals, mental health professionals, who evaluated Gordon Bowen, but they were only allowed to do limited mental health evaluations because Gordon Bowen fought getting a full mental health evaluation. But every single one of these mental health evaluators, and also those who were evaluating the safety of Gordon with his children, said is that Gordon Bowen was probably mentally ill, suffering from something along the lines of dissociative disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, or something along those lines. But to be very clear, to my knowledge, he's never received a diagnosis because he wasn't willing to do a full evaluation. But what you have is Gordon Bowen, who believes that God is speaking to him and telling him things like that he could learn the secret combinations, words, signs, oaths, and songs. And in Mormonism, that's a huge dog whistle because a lot of the Book of Mormon is about a group of people called the Gadianton robbers who were part of what they call these secret combinations, okay? Now, I do need to be really clear about this because I actually have seen a couple things that lead me to believe that this is not as damning as it looks on its face, okay? It's actually really interesting because Gordon Bowen writes about this, and he also writes about how the ritual abuse is different in its power and potency. So we know that Gordon Bowen knows about ritual abuse, but what I'm beginning to believe is that what really got Gordon Bowen interested in the ritual abuse is his affiliation with a man by the name of David Hamblin. And many of your listeners will probably recognize that name because David Hamblin is the one who was arrested and had been on trial up until May of last year, if I remember right, for allegations in which his lawyers successfully fought to bring in allegations of ritual abuse against David Hamblin in a case where the prosecutors didn't want those allegations to be brought in. But David Hamblin was supposedly part of a group inside of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints called the LDS Church of Satan, okay? And so that's an entirely different subject. But what's important for people to understand is that Gordon Bowen used David Hamblin as his therapist from the early 1980s all the way through the mid-2000s. And what we know about David Hamblin is that he was constantly plying the people that he was working with this idea that they had split personalities, that they were demonically possessed by evil spirits, that they had been ritually abused, and that through David Hamblin's therapy, which just happened to involve sexual acts, they could be healed from all this. And so David Hamblin for sure was sexually abusing both male and female patients. He even admits, there's a video out there where on YouTube where David Hamblin says, yes, I had sex with many of my patients. It worked for some and not for others. And so there's sort of this open question about what was going on between David Hamblin and Gordon Bowen. And to be really clear, we don't know. We don't know if Gordon Bowen and David Hamblin engaged in sexual behaviors with each other, but it kind of stands to reason that that kind of thing may have happened because Gordon Bowen was trying to get these evil spirits, quote unquote, out of him to cure his homosexuality. And we know that the way that David Hamblin was doing this was through what he was calling the righteous seed. Okay. And so he was basically engaging in oral sex, or having his clients engage in oral sex with him to please himself, and pretending that he was curing these people's dissociative disorders and homosexuality that he was claiming came through ritual abuse. Okay. I think the last one here is this one, because I think it's very, very important that they understand that the leaders of the Church of Jesus Christ were given these materials, these types of materials, and they knew and understood what was going on. But despite the fact that they knew and understood what was going on, they did not act to help these victims at all in any way, shape, or form, including, I consider Barbara Bowen a victim, not of sexual abuse, but of certainly of mental, emotional, spiritual, financial, basically any other kind of abuse you can think of. I don't think physical. I'm not aware of any physical abuse. But here's an example of Gordon Bowen writing in his journal. You can see that this is in uppercase. So this is the voice of God, according to Gordon Bowen, to him. I, the Lord, have heard your petition and the cries of your heart. Do not despair. I have all power over heaven and earth and am going to be your advocate. What be, which is Barbara. So what Barbara is doing now is not my will. She does not have my spirit guiding her in these choices. I have told her to forgive you, and she knows she could be, but chooses not to. And then Gordon says, she did not sin, Lord. But the Lord replies back to him, all sin, her judgments, her wrath, her attempts to destroy you, are great sins that have no relevance to your actions. So in addition to this, what you find in Gordon Bowen's journal is him writing things like, Barbara is going to kill the children. Barbara is going to be in prison for killing the children. Barbara is trying to destroy her. You are at war. And it's very frightening when you read it, if you are around cases of LDS abuse, because what you see is that this is very similar to cases like Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrandt. It's especially close to cases like Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow that everybody's probably familiar with. But this idea that people are dark, that they are possessed by evil spirits, that they are getting in the way of the Lord's work being done, and that they're dangerous to you, we know in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, this leads to things like murder. Okay, Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow murdered multiple people because they believed the same kind of things that Gordon Bowen was writing about. And apostles like James Faust, M. Russell Ballard, Dallin Oakes, they all knew that this was happening, and they didn't do anything to protect the children or Barbara as it related to what they were learning, which is really, really problematic as far as I'm concerned. Okay. So Emma, I'm going to take a second here. I'm going to stop. I'm going to let you ask any questions, and I'm going to sort of reload with a new set of screenshots. But up to this point, what questions do you have?
Yeah. I wanted to verify with you, if I'm not mistaken, Bowen's name has also come up in many public testimonies from survivors who have shared on podcasts like We Are the People Utah and elsewhere. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the place where Gordon Bowen's name shows up is in the Hamblin victim statements. Okay. And Gordon Bowen is accused of ritual abuse. And so certainly that's how a lot of people came to know Gordon Bowen's name. There's no doubt about that. I, of course, we've talked a lot about focusing on the things that we can prove. And so like my particular work has been, so I was introduced to Gordon Bowen through the Hamblin victim statements. But I don't talk about that very much anymore because that case has sort of worked its way through the judicial system. And what we've seen is that it doesn't appear that those allegations are going to be substantiated or corroborated, and there's not going to be any legal action that comes from them. And so what I choose to focus on is the things that are really well established in the historical record, like the things we're going over today. But yes, 100% Gordon Bowen has been accused of absolutely horrific ritual abuse. In fact, inside that LDS Church of Satan, according to the Hamblin doctors, he was known as the Punisher. And so he was the one that if you misbehaved or acted up inside the group, they would take you to Gordon Bowen, and he had like special ways of abusing people. So he's a major, major player inside those Hamblin documents for sure. And then also, to be very clear, there are a lot more allegations against Gordon Bowen than have been able to be published. And so I don't want to pretend like I know the nature extent of the abuse that Gordon Bowen has committed. What I know is that the allegations like that Ken Kennitzer and Adrian Pulfer have talked about, where like Gordon Bowen, his MO was he would get a hotel room, but he would only get one hotel room with one bed. And then he would have the men that he was with, he'd say, oh, no big deal, we'll just sleep in this bed together. And then when the men got in the bed with him, he would cuddle up to them and slip his hand down their pants and try to fondle them. So that kind of thing, I think, is really well substantiated and corroborated, whereas the ritual abuse is a little bit more difficult to sort of corroborate and prove.
Right. Thanks for answering that. And then the other thing I wanted to comment on, which I think is fascinating from my own perspective, and I know, again, this isn't substantiated, so I'm not making any claims, just an observation. I know he didn't go get the mental examinations to prove some of the theories of what was going on with him mentally or psychologically. But with my work with survivors, reading, or I should say, listening to you read his journal entries and what he was writing between himself and God parallels so deeply and synonymously with a lot of survivors who have shared their own journal entries on my show, between their personalities talking, right down to each part of them that writes having a different type of handwriting, whether that is uppercase, lowercase, or just a different type of handwriting. So I thought that was interesting that you brought up that he's been speculated potentially to have had a dissociative disorder, because that really parallels what I've seen on my own podcast from talking to hundreds of survivors.
Yeah, so that is super fascinating. So because just last week I was given a new set of documents from a source that are in Gordon Bowen's handwriting, and that's what I wanted to look at next. So while you're pulling up the screen again, I do want to just talk about the abuse that Gordon Bowen alleges that he suffered. So because it's pretty horrific. So Gordon Bowen claims that when he was 7 years old, he was sexually abused while his father watched on. His father was a very prominent radio personality in Salt Lake by the name of Wes Bowen. He had a show about jazz music, and he was also just out in the community doing a lot of different things. And so he had a lot of prominent friends in the community. And according to Gordon, Wes Bowen stood by and allowed a man to, according to the testimony of people, Gordon Bowen has told people that he was sodomized. When Gordon Bowen was deposed in his court case, Gordon Bowen denied being sodomized, but did not deny being abused while his father watched on. Okay. But it's really, really interesting what you said about different handwriting, because I'm going to show people several documents now. We got 8 documents that were written in Gordon Bowen's own hand in the late 1980s and early 1990s. And I want people to look at this handwriting thing that you mentioned, because I noticed this too, but I haven't never talked about it. But since you brought it up, let's talk about it. Okay. So you can see that like this handwriting, it's all in capitals. You see how it's almost like he has like a ruler, and he writes so straight. It's a uniform gap for each number here, kind of a thing. And so there's this part of his personality that it's extremely like rigidly ordered. Okay. And so in this document, the only thing I want to point out is he talks about his homosexuality, very openly in his notes. He says, homo, I can overcome. It was lack of feminine energy that led God to give me this test, not vice versa. Okay. And I'll leave this. We can leave this up here. People can pause and read the rest of this, but that's the important thing here. So Gordon Bowen eventually believes that he is only 10% homosexual. I'm not really sure what led him to that belief, but that is what he ends up believing through the therapy. So here's another document, and I want people to notice the difference here, okay?
So different.
So isn't that interesting? And so now
Yeah.
it's sort of this scrawl, okay? And then I'm going to show you another document that's even more interesting to me, at least. But just to give you an example, I mean, these documents also humanize Gordon Bowen, because what you see here is a guy who's really struggling with things in life. And so he's setting goals for the year 1989. Let me make that a little bit bigger so people can see it. So he has physical goals, which are just about daily exercise, regularly eating well and sleeping, properly. He has emotional goals that talk about getting married and having children. He talks about resolving his relationship with his dad. Okay. What's really interesting to me about this particular document, though, is that, so if you remember, his employment with Bonneville Communications was in the early 80s. This is either in the late 80s or the early 90s, but here's what Gordon Bowen says. Clear up or clean up, I can't tell, clean up any dead wood. For example, Dick Alsop and Ross Richens. So if people will remember, these are two people. Ross Richens is somebody that Gordon got fired, and Dick Alsop is the one who got Gordon Bowen fired. And years later, Gordon Bowen is still thinking about cleaning up these individuals as what he calls deadwood. Now, that's important because during the divorce case, Barbara Timothy found what was called an enemies list. It was literally titled enemies list. And so what we see is that Gordon Bowen gets a little bit fixated on who are his friends and who are his enemies. And once somebody is an enemy, he's going to put you on a list and he's going to try to affect your life. Okay. We can also see that he had a goal of writing and keeping a journal, which we know that he did because we actually have that journal now. Okay. Or at least parts of it. I don't have the whole thing, but we have parts of it. So here we go back to this other handwriting, okay, where it's all caps, it's extremely rigid, okay, and he's talking about why he didn't go to Yonge and Rubicam. And I'm just going to skip down to number 9 because I want people to understand that in Gordon Bowen's own words, he says, love darkness more than light. And the sum total of the reasons that he didn't go to Yonge and Rubicam were fear, selfishness, wickedness, and confusion. Okay. So for a very long time, a lot of my critics were coming to me and coming on my feed and saying, look, all the documents you have are from a divorce case. And in a divorce case, anybody can say anything, which I completely agree with 1,000%, which is why we have to do the hard work of validating and verifying things. But what this does is that these documents show that decades prior to the divorce, Gordon Bowen in his own hand is telling us that the things that we learn about him from the court documents are true because he's telling us that they're true. He was homosexual. He did say that he loved darkness more than life. He talks about how he's selfish and how he's wicked and how he's also confused. Okay. Here's a list of people that Gordon Bowen says that he's hurt. Okay. You can see there's 28 people on this list, including Barbara, including Ken, which is one of the men that says that Gordon Bowen sexually assaulted him. Also, Adrian would be another person that says that Gordon Bowen sexually assaulted him. And so Gordon Bowen seems very aware of his sins, and he also seems, at least in his own writings, to desire to overcome them, but he just doesn't seem to be able to get there. Okay. I think we'll go ahead. Oh, here, no, this is important. So, but there's just a very small part of this that's important. So we can see that what's validated about the court documents here is that he writes, meet CEOs for church, Kodak, etc. So this idea that Gordon Bowen is sort of a liaison between the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and this extensive network of people that Gordon Bowen knows because he's a super powerful advertising executive is borne out in Gordon Bowen's own notes. Okay. So we know that he's talking to himself. He's writing notes about meeting CEOs for the church. Okay. We also know that Gordon Bowen has done work for the Pope. And we know that eventually the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints finds its way to have an audience with the Pope. And I have not drawn like a straight line there to say that Gordon Bowen is the one that connected church leaders with the Pope, but I think that the inference is probably pretty strong that Gordon Bowen was at least a part of that process of familiarizing the church with the Pope and allowing the church leaders to meet with him. Okay. So here's the last document, and I want you just to sort of see again what you're talking about. So now we're mixing our handwriting, we're doodling. Okay, we're all over the place on this page. The page is almost entirely full. But look at this thing. Look at the things that he's saying. This is probably the most important document out of this. So he talks about give up, no, give in, no, fight, yes, be alone, hard to, none, 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 no more, no more, no more lies, no more, believe, trust, let go, tell the Lord to let him go, whatever that means, whoever him is, ask the Lord, trust the Lord, called to serve. He talks about, I wanted God to love me. He says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. I have sinned greatly against God. Does everybody see that here? I have sinned greatly against God. He talks about, I need Jesus. Go back to Jesus. Then there's this part down here where he talks about K, B, and A, lies of lust. And again, lies of lust. And he's transforming the word just, if you follow just, turns into lust over here. Okay. And then the most important parts for sure are, he talks about casting the devil out. So as early as the late 80s, early 90s, you've got this idea Gordon Bowen has that he needs to cast the devil out. And then here's the really, really important part, because he says he, and we're not sure who he was. We don't know if he's talking about the Lord or a church leader or whatever, but he says he was willing to give you, meaning Gordon, a magnificent, underlined, magnificent blessing after 20 years. Okay, so if this is in 91, you're talking about 71 is what he's talking about. So now you're talking about 50 something years to the current day of sort of this tortured life that Gordon Bowen has lived. But he says he was willing to give you a magnificent blessing after 20 years of self-abuse, inactivity, lack of prayer, and abomination with K, B, and A. Okay, so inside of the church, for those who are members of the church, they're going to recognize that when he says abomination, he's talking about having homosexual relationships with K, B, and A. And two of those initials just happen to line up with Ken Kennitzer potentially and Adrian Pulfer, two of the people who claimed that Gordon Bowen sexually abused them. So there's a good chance that they were having a relationship with him, and then Gordon was also abusing them. We don't know who this B is, but apparently Gordon Bowen was participating in something that he labeled as abomination with these three individuals. But you can just see this sort of tug, and like this tug of war going on inside of this man about wanting to trust the Lord, hoping that God loves him, but also recognizing that he's participated in these abominations, that he's engaging in lies of lust, and so on and so forth. So deeply, deeply troubled individual. Okay. All right. I think that's that for that group. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop sharing my screen again. I'm going to load up the next set of documents. I'm going to let you ask any questions about this that you'd like to.
I'm really fascinated in all of this, because obviously there's kind of there's the things that have a paper trail, and there's the things that make seemingly no sense in a way of what he said. But when you look at some of these layers and you put them together and you look at what's not being said, you can sort of paint a picture, in my opinion, of what's happening inside of him, and the type of family that he likely came from, what he's went through, based off all these other testimonies that you and I have heard from other survivors. And again, this is just speculation, but it connects a lot of dots for me. Even listening to you read the back and forth tug of war that's going on with him on just these documents, and how some documents it's almost like a part of his personality is separated, and it's one type of handwriting, and then there's the other on a different piece of paper, and then they come together. It's so reminiscent, and it reminds me so much of other journal entries that I've heard and seen shown on my show with that tug of war. I've even seen survivors show and read when different personalities are just allowed to come out whenever they're just having kind of a journaling session, and it's literally kind of like that tug of war. There'll be a part of them that comes out and is like kind of the aggressor, kind of attacking them, putting their sins out, and then there's sort of the forgiver or the childlike voice that comes out. And really fascinating reading that, especially because it does seem like his tug of war isn't just to maybe vent, but he's trying to really like make sense of things himself and almost like confess and repent, but he's at war. You know, he doesn't quite know how to do that. And you can see him sort of wanting it. You can see that on the paper, him admitting to it, which is something a lot of abusers don't do. You know, they don't put their sins on paper, even think that they sinned. And you see him doing that, and it's kind of wanting some type of resolution for it, or wanting to figure it out, but he doesn't seem to know where to go with it. It just keeps rambling on a bit.
Yeah. And so, I mean, what's interesting to me, and obviously I'm not a mental health professional, so everybody should just disregard this, but what I see is that what's interesting about Gordon is that it's actually like the God is like extremely forgiving. The God of Gordon's head is extremely forgiving towards Gordon, but very vengeful towards Gordon's enemies. And I think that's what's really concerning to me about what the brethren knew as they read these things, is that you have this guy who's clearly deeply torn about what's going on in his own life. He's developed this idea that he's hearing from God, and the God that he's hearing from is saying like crazy things about his wife and his children and other people. And the brethren are just like, like, we have a commercial to make. Gordon, can you help us make a commercial about how great our families are? And it's just this really huge disconnect about how the church is supposed to handle abuse and abusers and what's actually going on. So again, before we move on, let's just give a quick little bit of history between sort of 1990 and then to the present day. So in 2002, Gordon Bowen does get excommunicated from the church. Amongst the concerns were his homosexual behavior. Barbara Timothy had found that he had called male escort services over 1,500 times. Okay, so he was utilizing, now he says he was only getting massages, but that's a lot of male escort services, okay? 1,500 calls. Really disturbing. I've seen the websites, because you can use the telephone number to go to the website. And I haven't gone to all 1,500, but really, really disturbing homosexual male escort services that Gordon Bowen was utilizing, making phone calls to. There was also concerns about pedophilia. Okay, there were concerns about him abusing his children. And so the church did excommunicate him. What we don't know is this is 2002, so it's after 1995, which is when the church instituted their abuse hotline. But we don't have any idea whether the church called Child Protective Services, whether the church called the Curtin McConkie hotline, whether the church counseled anybody to call authorities to have Gordon Bowen investigated and potentially thrown in jail. It appears, of course, that they didn't do any of this, because instead of any of that happening, Gordon Bowen just continues to live his life working and continuing to work for the church at the behest of the apostles and prophet of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So huge institutional failure at all levels here, it appears. Okay. The biggest objection that I get, and I want to talk about it right now, is simply this. Gordon Bowen, what I hear is Gordon Bowen was never convicted of anything. To which I respond, that is true. Okay. But I also would respond like, have you ever committed a crime that you haven't been convicted of? Have you ever rolled through a stop sign that you weren't supposed to? Have you ever not stopped at a red light and not been caught? And then you have to also think about the fact that our court system is the best in the world. The American judicial system is the best in the world, but everybody knows that it's not perfect. It has weaknesses that can be exploited. And in particular, those weaknesses generally have to do with being white and rich. Okay, white, rich men tend to get away with crimes that other people don't get rid of. And what you see in Gordon Bowen's case is that he dragged his divorce case out for 7 or 8 years. He forced his ex-wife to spend millions of dollars seeking custody of their children and trying to resolve that divorce. And in the end, what ended up happening is that she was going to file this lawsuit where the children, like they did outline the abuse. That document is available on Gordon Bowen, courtdocuments.com. And they were going to file this lawsuit with all the abuse that Gordon Bowen had perpetrated. But somehow Gordon Bowen's lawyer got a hold of it, sent it to the judge, and the judge threatened Barbara Bowen that if she didn't stop what she was doing, that he was going to give full custody to Gordon Bowen. So under duress, she agreed to settle the divorce. And as part of that, Gordon Bowen forced everybody to sign these NDAs. So nobody can talk about this except for Lynn Packer, who refused to sign the NDA. So it's true that Gordon Bowen didn't get convicted, but that does not, lack of conviction does not equal innocence. And in this case, we have the testimony of over 40 people, 9 mental health professionals, family members, and his own voice now. Okay. And so what I tell people is like, if you want to believe that all these people came together and conspired to ruin Gordon Bowen's life, which is what he tells people privately, and I may show you something to do that. I have to decide whether I'm going to show that or not. But you can believe that, I guess. But I think that really makes you kind of a conspiracy theorist, because the idea that 40 separate people and 9 mental health professionals and family and everybody would come together to ruin one man's life, when in reality, his life hasn't been ruined at all. Like, he travels all over the world. He continues to work. He has this amazing company that makes billions of dollars, kind of a thing. But that idea just doesn't hold any water with me as a researcher. We have validated and verified, and again, now we've seen it in his own handwriting. And I believe Gordon Bowen is exactly who these people say that he is, and he's done the things that they say that he's done. Okay, and so I'm not willing to stop pressing this issue and investigating and researching simply because a rich white man was able to go through a court system and utilize the weaknesses of the court system to not be convicted. And he wouldn't have been convicted anyway. It was a civil case. So there would have been a judgment. There would have been monetary damages awarded, but he was never even criminally charged, if we're being like really accurate about that. Okay. So I think I'm ready. I think I've shared my screen. So I think we're ready to show some more information. And this is going to bring us up to sort of the last couple months. And this is where the story gets really interesting, at least in my opinion, probably because I've been a really big part of it. So I appreciate everybody hanging in here with me to get to this part of the story. So go ahead and let me know when you're ready and when you can see my screen. And we're going to talk about. Okay. So as we were investigating all of this, we became aware that Gordon Bowen was going to be inducted into the American Advertising Federation Hall of Fame. And so we started watching what was going on there. And they put up a page on their website with a bio for him. And in that bio, it said, Gordon was the creative director for the Olympic Games in Salt Lake City. He is also currently producing the Grace for the World ceremony on behalf of His Holiness, Pope Leo XIV. Marking the 2025 Jubilee year, Gordon leads the creative team for the Salt Lake City Temple Open House, opening spring of 2027, which expects to welcome 7 million visitors. So we knew that Gordon Bowen was working for the church up until the early 2020s because of this movie that he was commissioned to make that, by the way, never got released because people say it's demonic. The people who've seen the movie say that it's demonic and it's so bad that the church can't release it. But what we learned is that, at least according to this bio, Gordon Bowen was still working for the church currently as the lead of the creative team for the Salt Lake City Temple Open House. And so we started raising the alarm bells and telling people and publishing and working with groups to help them understand that the church still 45 years after Gordon Bowen stole money from the church and 20 something years after Gordon Bowen was excommunicated for the church for, amongst other things, concerns about pedophilia, the brethren were still continuing to work with Gordon Bowen all the way up through 2026 and 2027. As soon as we did that, I may have to stop sharing here again, because as soon as we did that, they tried to memory hole it. And so I know we have on the stage, Emma, a video called Bowen Cover Up. So now would be the time to show this video, and then I'll give some commentary about it. Let's see. I can't hear you again, but
it seems
I'll
like
turn
the
it on.
LDS Church and the American Advertising Federation and Gordon Bowen are engaging in a little bit of memory holing. But if you go and search Gordon Bowen Salt Lake Temple Creative Team, they haven't had a chance to memory hole what they had up in the search results. So you can see here, Gordon Bowen AAF. Gordon leads the creative team for the Salt Lake City Temple Open House, opening spring of 2027, which expects to welcome 7 million visitors. If we click on the actual article and scroll down, they've taken it out of the paragraph here, right? So you can see it says Gordon was the creative director for the Olympic Games in Salt Lake City. He is also currently producing the Grace for the World ceremony on behalf of His Holiness Pope Leo XIV, marking the 2025 Jubilee year. It was right after that where it talked about his temple stuff. So they're trying to memory hold this right now. So, but we're capturing it all. We have screenshots and stuff, but wanted to make a quick video as well just to show you.
Okay, great. Yeah, interesting, right? So clearly people were watching our reporting because we were the only ones reporting on this. We're really the only ones that cared about this at this particular point in time. And so the people were watching our reporting, and we had captured the original bio, and then we watched as they took it out of the web page. But as things were being cached, we could see that the old version was still in the search results. So we kind of caught them right in the middle of this cover up. And that's when like Zion Media and some other people stepped in and said, okay, like this is actually really interesting. And so we got a little bit of support here, and we started doing shows about it, and people started contacting the church and asking questions about why is this man working for the church in 2026 and 2027. As that was happening, we were notified that Gordon Bowen was scheduled to speak at an event in Salt Lake, like a World Economic Forum or something, World Trade Center event in Salt Lake City. And so somebody sent us a copy of the print bio. I don't know if I'm sharing. Am I not sharing screen again? Let me share my screen again. And so these people were nice enough to send us this bio. Go ahead and let me know when you can see that, Emma.
Add. Okay, can see it.
Great. And so what you can see here is this is a print program from this this conference that Gordon Bowen is speaking at. And it says down at the bottom, Bowen is leading the creative team for the Salt Lake City Temple Open House in spring 2027, which is expected to attract 7 million visitors. So here's witness number 2 that Gordon Bowen is out telling people that he's working for the church. And it's sort of building up at this point because there's a lot of people saying, no, this can't be true. Gordon Bowen can't be doing this, la da 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 da. And so at this point, this guy by the name of Latter-day Chad from Zion Media decides to go to the church office building and question them about whether or not Gordon Bowen is working for the church. And when he goes, he gets trespassed from the property. And of course, that kind of goes viral online. And so then what happens is we actually hear from the wife of one of the creative directors of the Salt Lake Temple Open House. Her name is Shauna Watts. And she says, this is all a lie. And Gordon Bowen is not working for the church. My husband does work for the church in this capacity. He meets with church leaders once a week, so on and so forth. And so I get put in touch with Shauna Watts, who then puts me in touch with her husband. And for a long time, we weren't saying his name, but he got recognized because Shauna Watts' online profile has a picture of her husband in her avatar. And somebody said, hey, that's Brent Watts. He's the CCO and founder of Struck, which is the company. Well, I'll show you. So let me just show you this. This is really interesting. So way back in May of 2026, Goel put a comment on one of my posts on X that said sort of this thing that I didn't understand, because he says, we were talking about Gordon Bowen working for the church, and somebody gobbling mode said, he's not a part of it. And Goel says, not according to the people at Struck who indicated Bowen was present at meetings. And so I recognized this name Struck. And when people said, oh, Brent Watts works for Struck, I said, oh man, like we're months later and all of a sudden we're hearing from Brent Watts. And so Brent Watts called me and we had a conversation online. And I'm only going to show my part of the conversation, or part of my part of the conversation, because I want to respect Brent's privacy. But this is the part where I'm telling him, here's what I'm going to publish, and getting his approval. So I said, Brent, here is what I'm planning on publishing that is related to our discussions. Please verify that I have accurately reflected your positions. Thanks. I have been in touch with this creative director of the Salt Lake Temple Open House, meaning Brent, and he states that Gordon Bowen was present at 2 meetings early in the process several years ago, but that Bowen is not a creative director for the project and has not been paid by the church for any work related to the Temple Open House. When asked why Gordon Bowen listed himself as the lead of the creative team for the open house online and in print, this individual replied that he did not know why Bowen had made that claim, but pointed out that he had heard that the information had been removed from Bowen's internet bio. This individual stressed the following three things. He is 100% certain that Gordon Bowen does not have the title of creative director for the 2027 Salt Lake Temple open house. Gordon Bowen has not been paid by the church for any open house work. And it is important that the open house not be detracted from by inaccurate information regarding Gordon Bowen's involvement. So what Brent didn't realize is that like weeks before he made this statement, his own employees were privately telling us that Gordon Bowen was at meetings related to the Temple Open House within the last month. Okay. So I went back to Brent and I said, Brent, I want to give you the opportunity to issue a denial of that statement that your employees are making if you would like to. And Brent Watts refused to make a statement about that particular question. Okay. So now we're left in this really weird situation because, you know, we have literal employees of the church at the head of the food chain, creative directors of this project, acknowledging that Gordon Bowen was working for the Salt Lake Temple House, but specifically saying he was not the creative director, which is not what Gordon Bowen said he was. He said he was leading the creative team. Okay, so now we're getting into sort of these legalese, like mumbo jumbo of like using language in a way that makes it difficult to discern the truth. Okay, so as this is going on, more and more people are getting involved in like trying to figure out what's going on. And so they start writing letters to the church. And on June 10th, the church starts writing letters back. So you can see this is a letter on official church letterhead. It's from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Office of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. On June 10th, 2026, a man by I don't know how to say his name, I apologize, but it's Aaron R. Jenny, I'm going to say, who's the secretary to the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. And he writes, Dear Sister So-and-so, I understand you recently spoke with someone in the temple department to express concern about Gordon Bowen's alleged involvement in the Salt Lake Temple celebration. We have been made aware that some online sources have made claims that are not accurate. I can confirm that Mr. Gordon Bowen is not, nor has he ever been, the creative director for the Salt Lake Temple celebration. I hope this information helps resolve any concerns. I wish you all the best as we move into this historic and exciting season of celebration and temple service. So what's happening is that the church starts getting this flood of phone calls and letters into the church office building, and they formulate this response, which is really, really gross, okay? Because it's so tricky because everything they say in this response is true, but it's not the whole truth, and it's not anything but the truth by any stretch of the imagination. And we know that simply because of the things that we've already been publishing and uncovering, okay? And it gets even better. Hang with me because it gets really a lot better here in just a couple minutes. But let's go through this letter. They talk about concern about Gordon Bowen's alleged involvement, okay? There is no alleged involvement. Brent Watts, the founder of Struck, who is the creative director of part of the Salt Lake Temple Open House, directly acknowledged that Gordon Bowen had involvement in the Salt Lake Temple celebration, at least early in the process, by bringing Brent into the project and attending meetings early on in the process. So this is just, this word alleged cannot be there anymore, okay? It then says, we've been made aware that some online sources have made claims that are not accurate. So first of all, that's true. There were some online sources that were a little bit excited and they made some statements that weren't exactly true. But he doesn't mention which sources he's talking about, nor does he mention the online sources like me and Goel who are accurately reporting. So they're trying to distract you and get you to believe that, like what they want you to read that as is, we have been made aware that online sources have made claims that are not accurate. But then if they ever have to go to court for this, they can say, well, we said some online sources, right? But they're counting on you not seeing that word some or not processing that word some, okay? And then the last lie is, well, it's not a lie, but it's a lie of omission. I can confirm that Mr. Gordon Bowen is not, nor has he ever been, the creative director. That's never what Gordon Bowen claimed. Now, that is what this online source claimed, and so they latched onto that. But what Gordon Bowen claimed is that he was leading the creative team, okay? Now, here's what's really critical about this, and this is really good. They started writing and mailing these letters on June 10th, 2026. A couple days after that, I got hit up by an anonymous source who said, I have video. Okay, so we had heard from people who had attended this conference that Gordon Bowen talked about working on the Salt Lake Temple open house, but none of them were willing to come forward. But then I got notified by a guy who said, I found the video of him talking about this. And so, Emma, if you want to queue up for us that second video that we put on the stage, the Bowen video, and let's watch this. And so remember, July 10th, the church starts mailing letters. Around the 13th or 14th, I don't know exactly what day, we published this video.
Secondly, it would be a disclaimer. I'm very pleased to have been working on the Temple Open House, but I'm certainly not leading it. But it's an honor to be part of such a magnificent project.
Okay, so big whoops. Okay, so because the church is sending out letters acting like Gordon Bowen has never had any part in this, but then we release a video from days before where Gordon Bowen, in a huge international conference, openly says that he's been working on the open house and that he's honored to be a part of such a magnificent project. Okay, so we kind of caught him, right? We kind of caught him red-handed here. Now, most people don't know this because we're having trouble getting people to cover it. So thank you, Emma, for covering it, because this is going to help. But like we've caught them. They're lying about this. And the reason they're lying about this is they don't want people to know that they created their brand with a man who stole money from the church, abused children, took advantage, broke laws, stole people's work, so on and so forth. And that he's the one that created their brand and their image. They just can't have that happen. And so they're starting to trip over themselves and tell truths that are half truths, but are really lies, and this kind of thing. Okay. So let me share my screen again. Well, let me actually check before I share my screen again. Let me make sure is there anything else I need to show here? Oh yeah. Another important thing. I actually forgot this, so we're gonna have to go backwards, but this is actually really important. So I'm gonna share my screen. During the show where Latter-day Chad got trespassed from the church office building, I received another anonymous tip, and it was this picture. So what we have here is this is Disneyland. And we already had heard that that the brethren, the apostles, had gone to Disneyland to study crowd control and this kind of thing. But what we learned is that at that trip at Disneyland, this is Gordon Bowen right here in the gray jacket and the black cap. Okay, that's Gordon Bowen. Right next to him is an apostle by the name of Quentin Cook. This is an apostle by the name of Dieter Uchtdorf. There's some argument about whether this is an apostle by the name of Neil Anderson. I can't really tell, but a lot of people think it is. This is a man who wasn't an apostle at the time, but is an apostle now. His name is Gerald Kosei. And this is an apostle by the name of Gary Stevenson. And so as people are watching LDS Chad Latter-day Chad, getting trespassed from the church office building, we drop that Gordon Bowen was at Disneyland with all of these apostles as part of the Salt Lake Temple open house project. Okay. So we've just caught them multiple times at this point, just not being fully forthright or honest about what's going on here. Okay. So here's another stopping point. I'm going to let you go ahead and ask any questions that you have while I load up our next set of things. And I'm going to check on how we're doing on time as well.
I just wanted to comment again, just from hearing so many testimonies myself, it's very interesting that Disneyland is where they're meeting for this. That's right. A really common, and maybe there was a reason for it. If, the crowd control there is, unparalleled. There's obviously a lot of people that go there. Maybe it was actually a good place to go and learn how to do that. However, just hearing so many testimonies from survivors and how often Disneyland comes up as a place where these abusers go to commune and to do bad things, and that there's close affiliations between a lot of religious institutions and government, and that Disney isn't far off the beaten path from all these connections that you and others have made to things like the LDS Church of Satan. It's really fascinating that that's the place that they are all meeting to gather. And that's amazing that you've been able to pick up all these things that they're aggressively trying to wipe off the internet and, backtrack on. It's really incredible that you've made these screenshots and taken the videos and, kept it all. It's awesome.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's been a really fascinating experience. And honestly, it's been a lot of fun. I mean, we're sort of chasing a rabbit here, and they keep trying to move. Yeah, in real time. And we've had a lot of success. And so I just want to say a quick thank you. It's like there are a lot of people who are interested in this and are working. I don't want to be here today pretending like I'm the one who found all this. I've sort of become a conduit of information that people, and sometimes I find things, but a lot of the time it's just me putting things up that other people have found and sent to me, which it's really awesome to be a part of such a great group of people. And so I just want to sort of shout out. I know that none of them want to be known by name or anything like that, but I do want to send a shout out to all these people who've been so helpful. It's just been great to be a part of a group of people committed to exposing the truth. So, okay, I'm ready again. Yeah, right. So I'm ready again with some screen shares, and I want to shift. Actually, before we screen share, let me just talk really quickly, because so that sort of ends the Gordon Bowen story up to today. This is where we sit. We have, because of what we've done, we have interest from several larger organizations to cover the story, but they're concerned about a couple things. Some of the things are real, some of the things aren't real. For example, they're concerned about getting sued. That's a very real concern, except that we've documented everything, so they should be okay if they just stick to the court documents and that kind of a thing. The other thing they're concerned about is that when people learn about what happened here over the last 40 or so years, that there might be violence. Like they're very tuned into this because of the church that got burned down in Michigan and so on and so forth. And so I understand that. I don't know that I agree with it, because people who are angry are usually actually placated when people tell the truth, and they get more angry when they find out that they're being lied to. But that's neither here nor there. We're talking this through with other people. And so, but this is where we are right now. What I want to do at this point is I want to spend about 30 minutes, maybe a little bit more, talking about Gordon Bowen as a symptom, not as the problem itself. Okay, so the Gordon Bowen situation is a huge problem, but if you back up and take the 30,000 foot view, what Gordon Bowen is really is he's a symptom of a much larger problem. And I've kind of talked about this. I think I even talked about it on your show, Emma. But what I want to show is how secret societies and quasi-religious organizations infiltrated church leadership. And because those are the types of men who are leading the church right now, men like Gordon Bowen are allowed to be inside of the pasture, maiming sheep. And then these leaders are taking these sheep, and instead of healing them, they're dumping them over the fence and inviting the wolf in sheep's clothing to have dinner with them and paying him millions of dollars to make movies and so on and so forth. Because I think for most people, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance about why are these guys working with this guy who stole money from them? But I want to make a case for why I believe that's happening. So that's going to be the next part of the presentation. Okay. So we're going to step back in time to the early 1900s in Utah. And it's not even a state yet. Utah's not a state yet. And there's a big schism inside of the church and the state itself about whether they want to pursue statehood. And eventually, obviously, the group that wants to pursue statehood wins that battle. And so the secularization of Utah, which had already started previous to this, because Utah is such a mineral-rich state, and it's beautiful, and it has a lot of things going for it, and they built the railroad through it. So the secularization had already started, but it really starts ramping up. And where it really starts ramping up is at the University of Utah through the Greek living system. Okay. I actually have another one. Let me see if I can find this other one that I want to read before I read this. Yeah, here we go. This is what I want to read first, and then we'll go to the next one. So I get a lot of pushback for calling fraternities and sororities secret societies. But what we're going to do now is spend a little bit of time inside of a document, which is the actual ritual for Sigma Chi. And that document got leaked by WikiLeaks several years ago. And it goes through sort of the rituals and the laws and bylaws of Sigma Chi. Okay. So what I want to read here is it says, the ritual is part of the law of the fraternity. The ritual has equal force and validity in all respects with the constitution of the fraternity. The matter contained in the Constitution, however, is not secret in character, while that contained in the ritual is inviolably secret, except the special services as therein specified. So I get so many people who want to argue with me about whether fraternities are secret societies, but in their own handbook, in their own ritual, it says that it's inviolably secret. Okay? These are secret quasi-religious organizations. What do I mean by quasi-religious? Well, if you go through their document, if you go through their ritual document, you'll see that they have things like prayers. Okay? So here's the prayer that they say at their chapter meeting. The proconsul, who's like the leader of the group, says, "Oh God, who has taught us that true friendship is true service, enable us, we pray thee, so to befriend our brothers that we may assist them to attain those virtues which are pleasing to thee." And everybody says together, "Amen." And the proconsul says, "O Lord, our judge, who has commanded us to speak righteousness and to judge uprightly, grant that iniquity may not be found in our mouths, nor wickedness in our minds, but that from pure hearts we may speak and do those things that are just in thy sight." And everybody says, "Amen." And then the proconsul says, "O God, our Father, grant that we find in thee the light of knowledge and the fullness of all virtue, and grant that while we seek for the gifts of learning, we may never depart from thee, the fountain of all wisdom. Amen." Okay, so they have prayers. They also have something called the Black Sacrament. Okay, or the Black Supper. I always get that wrong. I apologize. And let me turn my phone off. I just heard it ding. I apologize for that too. Give me 1 second. Okay. So they have what's called the Black Supper, which is basically what I would consider a mockery of the Lord's Supper. And let's look at why I believe that. So here it shows how everybody's supposed to be laid out. You have your candidates here with a table. The consul stands in the middle of the room. They have members and members and members all around the room. And here's what happens. The Black Supper in the fraternity is a serious and solemn ceremony, okay? Quasi-religious. It's a solemn ceremony used as a preliminary introduction to the formal initiation. The primary purpose of the ceremony is to impress candidates with the seriousness of our teachings. It is a lesson in personal responsibility. I have no idea how what they do here is a lesson in personal responsibility, but okay. The ceremony sets the scene for the quest and gives the candidate the encouragement of the chapter for the symbolic mission he will undertake. Okay, so what do they need? They need tables, chairs for each candidate, 2 or 3 candles for the table, goblets and saucers, a black cloth, bread and water, and black robes for members. Ideally, this ceremony should be conducted in a room large enough to accommodate the entire chapter, standing at one end as a group and the candidates seated at a long table at the other end. The members are to be dressed in black robes with hoods drawn over their heads. They should stand as a body facing the candidates with arms folded. And then it goes on, but I stopped there. So I want to stop here because for your audience, this kind of thing should sound very familiar, right? It's a ritual, okay, with people with candles, and it's with people with black robes and being hooded and all this kind of stuff. So whenever anybody says to me, "I just can't see people engaging in this stuff that you talk about, ritual abuse," like the Sigma Chi ritual is like one small step away from what ritual abuse survivors describe every single day. So if you don't have the power of imagination to move from what Sigma Chi does to what we hear about in ritual abuse stories, I think you're kind of dense. Sorry, that's a little bit rude. That's like my Twitter personality coming out. But like, it doesn't take any imagination at all to go from Sigma Chi's rituals to the types of rituals we hear about from ritual abuse survivors, right?
And if I can comment really quick, one of the most common rituals that pops up and is discussed on my podcast is one called the Last Supper. That's probably come up the most times out of any ritual on my podcast from satanic ritual abuse survivors. And that's literally what it's called, the Last Supper. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And so, I mean, so I'm not here to say that Sigma Chi is trying to mock Jesus Christ. In fact, I think personally that all fraternities come from Freemasonry, and that Freemasonry is really sort of a branch of like believing, well, I don't know what Freemasons believe exactly, but like I think that these fraternities believe in things like the Knights Templar. And I think that they think that they're modern like holders of the chalice, and that the white cross for Sigma Chi is like, it's literally like they're passing on these traditions. And I'm going to show you why I believe that. I think there's really strong evidence for this. But before I do that, I just want to show you something else. Like as part of their order, the order of their fraternity, they have what they call the proper arrangement for the chapter meeting. And so they have the consul sit in a certain place, the proconsul sit in another place, the annotator sit in another place. And then look what they do. They set it up where the senior initiate sits over here on the right-hand side, and it goes around the room to the most recent initiate. Now, what's interesting about this for me as a former member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is this is exactly what the Quorum of the 12 Apostles does. Okay? They will come into a room and leave a room and sit down and stand up, where the senior initiate has to come into the room first, sit down first, stand up first, and exit the room first. And they file out of the room in the same way that fraternities do this. Now, I don't know when the tradition started with the apostles of the Quorum of the 12 of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I can't sit here and say that they stole this from fraternities, but it's a striking resemblance to the fraternities that, as I'm going to show you, so many of these men are a part of, or were a part of. We may have moved through this part of church history, but I just want to point that out. Okay. Supper. Oh yes, here we go. So here's another reason that I say that these are quasi-religious organizations. This is from their ritual. Anybody can go get this online. Just Google WikiLeaks Sigma Chi ritual, and you can pull it down and read it for yourself. But in that document, it says this: Jesus was the founder and leader of a brotherhood. He chose different types of men from the common walks of life and pledged them to a lifelong devotion to his cause. He met them in secret places. Together, they shared certain spiritual truths and practiced noble virtues. In solemn secrecy, Jesus revealed the deepest purposes of his heart. He outlined a philosophy for a good life and announced the ideals for a better society. Secret signs, symbols, and solemn ritual characterized their brotherhood. So what they're saying here is that they're continuing this tradition as followers of Christ. Now, you don't have to be a follower of Christ to be in Sigma Chi, but in their own ritual, it's all about the white cross. It's all about this quest. It's all about the Black Supper, which resembles the Lord's Supper. And it's all about this idea that Jesus was a founder of a secret brotherhood, or a brotherhood where secret things took place in secret places. And so this is why I call fraternities quasi-religious occult secret societies. Okay. And I guess people can argue with me about that as much as they want to. I don't think I'm going to budge off this position anymore. I think that we've established this pretty well. Okay. All right, let's keep going. Another sort of key indicator that it's a quasi-religious organization is that they have set up like a patron saint for their organization. And so again, as part of their meetings, the consul will say, "Who is our ancient patron?" And all together, the brothers will say, "Constantine, who conquered by the cross." The consul gives the sign of the salutation and says, "Brothers, guard well the honor of the cross." And the brothers all say, I don't know how to say this, "In hoc signo vinces." I may have totally butchered that. Sorry, Sigma Chi guys who may be watching. The consul says, "Brothers, we part in unity." Brothers say, "So mote it be." So you can sort of see this language, this cosplay that's going on, that there are these knights in a secret brotherhood being given secret handshakes and secret signs and secret knowledge, and that their job is to guard the honor of the cross, and that their patron saint is Constantine, who, again, as an LDS person, this is really weird, because growing up, I was really taught that the Great Apostasy occurred and that Constantine was a major part of the Great Apostasy because he's the one who combined political power with ecclesiastical power and united those two things. And so it was like, for me, growing up in the church, Constantine was like a bad guy. But here I have members of my church, leaders of my church, partaking of the Black Supper, saying these prayers, calling Constantine their ancient patron or their patron saint, and all these weird things that they really shouldn't be doing, in my estimation. And then beyond that, they're doing things like hazing each other, paddling each other. And so all this stuff, like, let me give you an example of that. Here's a really good example. Okay. This is a very important photo. It comes from a book. There's only like 1,000 of these books or something like that, maybe not even that many out in the world, but I was able to get my hands on one. And so what you see down here is this says, a Sigma Chi tradition, Beverly Felt gets kissed by every Sigma Chi. What most people don't realize is that in the background here, where I have the cursor, that is the prophet of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints when he's a young man. This is Russell M. Nelson. And he was a Sigma Chi member, along with M. Russell Ballard and Joseph Worthlin. And then Robert D. Hales was a member of Pi Kappa Alpha. And Dallin Oaks, the current prophet, was a member of a group called the Gold Brickers down at BYU, who won't allow fraternities, but they created what they called social clubs, quote unquote. They were very much like fraternities, where they would haze each other and paddle each other and do all kinds of crazy stuff. But this is literally the prophet of the church, who also must have participated in kissing Beverly Felt, which I'm sure the church wouldn't be too happy to know, that men who held the priesthood were engaging in this Sigma Chi tradition where, you know, anywhere between 20 and 100 men all kiss the same girl. Okay. And I know that in 2026, people are going to roll their eyes and say, what's the big deal? But this is 1940. Okay. Russell Nelson graduated in 1945. So it has to be sometime around that 1940 to 1945 timeframe when this was happening. And so these guys who are in this quasi-religious organization are also doing crazy things like everybody kissing the same woman. And then, like, I've talked to some guys from the Sigma Chi chapter there at the University of Utah, and apparently they don't always do the same thing to haze, but, like, for example, in the 1970s, they did this thing called boat racing, where they would take water and soap and they would soap up the floor of the frat house, and then they would force everybody to get naked, and they would all just go crazy and slip and slide inside of the frat house naked with each other. So again, something that, like, leaders of a church should not be engaging in. But these particular leaders of the church were members of Sigma Chi. And then later on, we're going to talk about Skull and Bones for a second. But they eventually sort of infiltrated their way up into leadership positions in the church and in the community. So this particular slide here has a couple examples of why this is important and why I'm tying it into today's story. So what this says is, when Gordon Bowen was bleeding his ex-wife dry by spending millions of dollars on a divorce case and stretching it out indefinitely, she had 3 ecclesiastical leaders she was working with, each of whom was a death oath-making secret society member who had partaken of the Black Supper. So this is why this is really important to me, because we have probably the most important abuse case inside the church in a while. And the woman who was being abused and her children were forced to deal with ecclesiastical leaders who were all members of Sigma Chi. Her bishop was a man by the name of Marcus Pinnock, okay, member of Sigma Chi, okay. Her stake president was a man by the name of Ellis Ivory, also a member of Sigma Chi. Then the apostle that she was working with was M. Russell Ballard, also a member of Sigma Chi. So I don't know about anybody else, but so it's actually really interesting, because when I got excommunicated, my stake president was a member of Sigma Chi. I don't think that my stake president got to be stake president because he was a member of Sigma Chi, because he's from Kansas and he wasn't a member of the church when he joined Sigma Chi. And there's a lot of reasons I don't believe that, but it's just really interesting to see that a lot of leadership of the church end up being a part of these secret societies. But I was very uncomfortable with the fact that I was being judged by a man who shared a fraternity with the prophet of the church, because I had no idea what secret agreements they've made. I don't even know if all the agreements that I've read in the ritual are all the agreements that they make. I kind of doubt that it is. I imagine there are probably agreements that nobody knows about that they never write down because they don't want it to leak out like it did through WikiLeaks. But in the case of Gordon Bowen, every ecclesiastical leader involved at the time when she was trying to get custody of her children and trying to get help for the abuse that was taking place were all Sigma Chi members. And I don't think it's outside of the realm of possibility that especially like Marcus Pinnock was specifically called into that position because of the brotherhood that he had in this quasi-religious organization called Sigma Chi with Ellis Ivory and Russell Ballard, because they now have a chain of command in which they can control everything with people that they've known forever and trust because of these secret oaths that they make with each other. Okay, I'll stop there for 1 second and let you ask any questions that you want to.
First of all, you're so brave for covering all of this, especially because some of the people that you're covering are still alive and active and in the public eye, you know, but it's just amazing how much your work parallels survivor testimonies. I've done an episode before here on my podcast with a really incredible gentleman who covers a lot of Christian conspiracies, sort of like how you do with the LDS Church, but a little bit different in the way that he does it. He's a little bit more focused on biblical conspiracy. But an episode that he did on my podcast was about this very topic, how fraternities and sororities are a gateway to higher level secret societies. It's almost like a training grounds to test people and train them young before they enter some of the more serious secret societies and climb the ranks. And it's almost a test of loyalty and to see, you know, if somebody can be conditioned and trusted before they're put into a higher position. And he named a lot of different presidents who have gone in these different secret societies, just a lot of different people in society that have gone through fraternities and ended up graduating into higher level secret societies or positions of power in society. So it is just very interesting, you know, and I love that you were able to connect all of this. And it's incredible, not just that one of these people were in this specific fraternity that you're covering, but so many in the same circle were in the same exact fraternity. And I also don't think it's a coincidence that I don't know if it was the manual or whatever you said, the documents, you know, it's actually called the ritual. They didn't call it like the ceremony or the party or the gathering, you know, it's the ritual. So it is just very interesting, you know, and I think if more people dug into leaders in society, you'd see a lot of other groups that began their maybe climb to fame or celebrity or politics. A lot of people do start in these fraternities. And I would have to say, I completely agree with you, you know, and I appreciate you bringing this into the conversation because I do think it's really important and it's like an overlooked part of the bigger picture.
Yeah. So, I mean, and that's a perfect transition. I'm going to read one more thing about Sigma Chi, and then I'm going to show you what your other guest was saying. I'm going to prove it with documents. Okay. And Utah is the perfect use case of this idea of, like, I've always called it like it's like a baseball organization, and the baseball organization has the minor league team. And if you perform well in the minor league team, then you get to go to the majors. And if you do well in the majors, then you get to go to the Hall of Fame. But I'm going to show you exactly how that works in Utah. Okay. So just to wrap up this Sigma Chi stuff, like, this is not at the University of Utah, but these are the kinds of things. This is written by a Sigma Chi brother in a national publication. He says, our bunch had standards, but to be initiated to Sigma Chi, Michigan State, 1963, you were still required to pick up a stuffed olive off the chapter room floor using nothing but the naked cheeks of your behind. And while many actives watched and cheered, deliver the olive to a small waiting Dixie cup. You still had to sit 6 hours straight on the hard edge of a hard chair, knees together, blindfolded, while someone played Ravel's Bolero Fortissimo directly into your ears. You had to do many, many, many painful push-ups. You had to let the older boys scream obscenities and insults in your face, blow cigar smoke in your eyes, and breathe on you until they were tired of it. You had to tramp out into the frozen Michigan night in search of nothing less than a white cross, the fraternity's sacred emblem, which of course wasn't there. You had to bray like a donkey, buzz like a fly, bleat like a goat, be scorned, scourged, ridiculed, and insulted until they let you join them. it must have seemed like a good idea. So my most controversial position, Emma, inside of this space that nobody likes, I personally believe that the lowest level of ritual abuse is fraternal abuse. Okay. Everything described here by this man who joined Sigma Chi at Michigan State is abusive. And it's all done as part of a ritual. And so I know that when we talk about ritual abuse, people want to talk about babies' hearts being torn out and eaten. They want to talk about people being dismembered. They want to talk about satanic stuff and all that. And I think that that does exist, but on a much lower scale. And I think that where it starts is with stuff like this. And like you said, you get people desensitized to this kind of stuff. And is it really hard to imagine that if you start seeing success in your life because you're willing to participate in this kind of abuse and shame bonding, that you would not be willing to participate in other forms of ritual abuse in order to continue to further your life, like your career, right? Maybe meeting the right women, maybe being put in positions of power, influence, and gain, and that kind of a thing. And so nobody really likes this, but I stand firm in my belief that the lowest levels of ritual abuse is fraternal abuse, the things that happen inside of fraternity houses. And that's just my opinion about that. All right, I'm going to stop sharing again, and I'm going to load up our next set, and we can talk a little bit about my crazy claims.
Just really fascinating. And it's really cool, too, that you were able to get a lot of these rituals and the ceremonies in actual documentation where you can see the words and what's being said.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm sure that Sigma Chi was very upset when that stuff got leaked, but we're very fortunate that it did get leaked because it gives us that documentary evidence that we like so much and that we need in order to shift that Overton window that you talked about at the very beginning. Because when you first start talking about this, people just don't want to believe it. But when they read it from the document and can see it and have the testimony of people who are members of the society, now all of a sudden we can have this conversation about the minor leagues versus the major leagues, which is what we're going to talk about now. Because at the University of Utah, you had Sigma Chi and Pi Kappa Alpha were the two strongest fraternities. And out of those two fraternities, they would select members for Skull and Bones. Okay. Now, everybody knows about Yale Skull and Bones, and they understand that. What nobody understands and what people will fight to the death about is this University of Utah chapter of Skull and Bones. And what I'm going to show you today is that chapter of Skull and Bones at University of Utah did come from Yale's chapter of Skull and Bones, and it was the major leagues. And it shows exactly what you just outlined, Emma, which is that once they can get you to do the things that we read about at Sigma Chi, now we're going to look at the things that were going on at Skull and Bones and how they're just progressively ramping up, right? And conditioning people and testing people to see how far they're willing to go inside of this abusive system that exists in order to identify who they want to put in places where they can later control them. Okay, because it's all a system of control. A fraternity is nothing but a system of control. Okay, everybody's ranked and you are in your place and you don't get to move up until somebody leaves. Okay, all right, so let's share my screen again and let's talk about University of Utah Skull and Bones, which is like a fun thing, and I never get to talk about it, so thanks again for letting me do it. So the very first thing, like everybody who's in Utah, and like I know people whose grandpas were in this organization and their dads were in this organization, and the very first thing they'll say is, it wasn't a secret society, it was an honors society, okay? But all you have to do is go to the yearbook and read from the very first year that Skull and Bones. It's a little bit dark, but you can definitely see the picture. But next to the picture, it says Skull and Bones. And here's how they announced this being put onto the campus. Merely a bunch of juniors, principally men, which means all men, which was organized towards the close of school. The purpose of the club is to advance the general interest of the school in general and the junior class in particular, to break up antagonism between fraternities and between frat men and those who do not belong to fraternities. Okay. The society is a secret one, and their ways are deep and mysterious. The members propose to establish such an organization in the class of 1911 next year, with the hopes that it may live in the junior class forevermore. Okay, so nobody can say that the University of Utah Skull and Bones is an honor society and not a secret society, unless they want to say that it's a secret honor society, I guess. Okay, But here's what I have to ask people about this. If it's an honor society, I was in several honor societies growing up, okay? Here is University of Utah Skull and Bones members showing up to an interview in death masks and black robes. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never been part of an honor society which required me to wear death masks and black robes. And if they had required me to do that, I definitely wouldn't have joined, okay? But these are the kinds of things that these guys are doing, okay? Now they say, we just want anonymity because we don't want people to be jealous of us, blah, 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 okay? But they're also doing things like this. Not there, here. They're also putting out pictures in the school newspaper, courtesy of the University of Utah Skull and Bones Society, that look like this. And at first, if you were just to glance at it, you'd think, oh, okay, human skull on a couple of books. But when you look at it more closely, what you see is a bunch of symbolism. You see this weird tooth, right? It's almost like an animal tooth. This is not a normal nasal cavity, but what does it have inside of it? It has a cross inside of it. So again, quasi-religious. It has a skull cap. So this person's skull was sawed off, okay? And they have that there. Then the book that they put it on is the encyclopedia, but it's the encyclopedia that starts with the suffix M-A-L. So for those of you who like Disney, you'll remember the villain Maleficent, and you might remember words like malignant, right? So the suffix, or the prefix, excuse me, M-A-L stands for bad or evil. And what they're basically trying to tell you is that we are people who are not quite people who engage and do evil things, okay? And it's all through symbolism. But this is what's going on at the University of Utah Skull and Bones Society. Again, this is not something an honor society does. This is something an occult secret society does, okay? We also know that like their ritual was taking place up in a canyon just east of the University of Utah for a long time. What we also know is that several, like at least 2 apostles were a part of this group. So, well, claim to have been a part of this group. So Russell M. Nelson, who we talked about as a member of Sigma Chi, claims to have been a part of Skull and Bones. I personally think he lied about that. That's a long story, but that's my personal belief. And then we know that Robert D. Hales was a member of Skull and Bones. So here's a big hint that people need to understand. I'm going to blow this up. This is an actual invitation letter to Skull and Bones from the University of Utah. I don't possess it, but my friend Ben McClintock does. He's another researcher for Tree of Liberty Society. And somebody gave him this actual invitation from sometime in the 70s or something like that. But what you can see is it's the Skull and Bones, and it's hard to see, but what you can see here is that it's the 3-2-2. So you're not allowed to use this insignia unless you're a part of the Yale Skull and Bones network. And the University of Utah was using this insignia as the wax seal on their letters of invitation into the fraternity. So this was definitely a part of Yale. We can also find it in the yearbook and in the school newspapers, where it talks very openly that the University of Utah Skull and Bones was started by a Yale Bonesman as part of the national network. But then later on, they claimed that they are no longer a part of that network. Okay? That's for another day. I think that's a longer story. So to your point, or to my point, no, let's do this. This is the only one left we need to do. I just want to show people what you're talking about. And so what you have here is I went ahead and we went through every yearbook of the University of Utah, and we pulled out every year that had fraternity brothers listed and Skull and Bones and Allen Key Society members listed. And we put it into a spreadsheet so that I could analyze the data. And what we found out is that there was a very clear power sharing agreement between Pi Kappa Alpha and Sigma Chi. At the time that I published this, I was only through the year 1955, but we had up through 1970. And when we got to 1970, it was almost exactly the same number of members in Skull and Bones from Pi Kappa Alpha and Sigma Chi, with a significantly less number of members of other fraternities like Beta Theta Pi, Phi Delta Theta, Sigma Nu, Alpha Pi, Kappa Sigma, and so on and so forth. But so like what you're saying about this sort of filtering process is 100% true. And it's not a random filtering process. Just like it's not random that 6 of the 12 members of the quorum of 12 apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints were men who had engaged in death oaths. Okay, that can't be random. Okay, I haven't run the actual calculation, but it's going to be 1 in 100 million that happens, that 6 men get selected at the same time in a church the size of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to be a part of the highest governing body. And so what you see is they go from fraternities like Sigma Chi and Pi Kappa Alpha into other secret societies like Skull and Bones and Allen Key. Then they end up in the community in places like Rotary International, which is extremely important in church history. And like maybe a handful of people know this and understand this. But they end up in Rotary International, where then they're in bed with the United Nations. Okay, and then they're spread out and in the community. Let's just talk about in Utah how this works. 2 of the most important, here, let me stop sharing my screen actually, because I want people to see me as I talk about this. So let's just talk about how this looks in real life inside of Utah. Inside of Utah, 2 of the most prominent business schools are the Huntsman Business School at the Utah State University and the Marriott School of Business at Brigham Young University. The Huntsmans and the Marriotts are both Sigma Chi. Okay. If you drive down I-15 and you're looking for a car, you're going to see Warner Automotive and you're going to see Garf Automotive. And they're 2 of the biggest automotive dealers in the state, both Sigma Chi. If you want to buy a home, there's a good chance that the house you're going to buy is Ivory Homes. Ivory and Boyer, the guys who founded Ivory Homes, both Sigma Chi. Okay. So I have a list of every Sigma Chi member at the University of Utah up through about the year 2000. And eventually we're going to get to the point where we're going to go through all those names and we're going to show just how deep and wide this network is inside the state of Utah. But even just looking at it, and the way that bleeds into the church is that you have Sigma Chi car dealers, you have Sigma Chi home sellers, you have Sigma Chi financial planners, and then you have Sigma Chi ecclesiastical leaders. And what ends up happening is John Huntsman starts lending his private jet to Russell M. Nelson to do church business. And now you've got this intermingling of political power, ecclesiastical power, and business power inside a small community. Utah's not very big. There's not a ton of people there. And they're running the entire show. The mayor of Salt Lake City, Rocky Anderson, Sigma Chi. Okay. Lawyer Jim Jardine, who covered up abuse in the Brenda Miles case, Sigma Chi. So wherever you are and whatever trouble you find yourself in, if you're in Utah and if you're a member of Sigma Chi, Skull and Bones, Rotary International, United Nations, you can always find help to get you out of whatever trouble you find yourself in. And that's how this works in practice, okay? And it's not speculation. We see it in the historical record and we can prove it through documentation. So yeah, to broaden that out really quickly, and then I'll let you, I think that's pretty much everything. I'll look really quick, but to broaden that out, like you were mentioning, this isn't just Utah. There are fraternal organizations everywhere, and Rotary International spreads worldwide. And so we like to think of this as like really super secretive groups. I would say that the conspiracy is far more mundane than we want it to be. And it really lies in this abuse that starts at the level of fraternities, rolls into organizations like Rotary, Lions Club, so on and so forth, ends up at intranational or supranational organizations like the United Nations or World Economic Forum. That's another thing. The church has Garrett Gong, who was a part of, I'm going to get this wrong because it wasn't the World Economic Forum, the Council on Foreign Relations. Okay. But you end up with these Mormon leaders who are just deeply enmeshed and tied into these secret societies that engage in shame bonding and weird rituals that they really shouldn't be engaging in if they want to be leaders of a church. And to me, this is the last thing I'll say. I always say that and then I say more, but that's just a habit I have. But to me, it's very clear that no person who claims to be a representative of Jesus Christ should engage in these behaviors. That's just a personal belief that I have. And that comes from my own life. I was tapped to be a part of Kappa Sigma at the University of Denver. When I found out what they wanted me to do, as a disciple of Jesus Christ, I turned them down because I felt like I would be doing something that was displeasing to my master. Okay. And so, but what you end up having is this situation where everything's all mushed together and the church no longer stands alone, independent above all other things, but it's now a part of much larger systems. In the case of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, in other shows we've shown, right, Emma, that they're a huge part of the Central Intelligence Agency. They develop torture programs for the CIA. They're a huge part of the military industrial complex. The Dugway Proving Grounds is a huge military installation. They wanted to do the MX missiles there out of Utah. they're just, and now they're really a part of this 15-minute city data center. There's a huge story right now going on about this gigantic data center that they want to build to store your information and sort of build, at least in my opinion, a digital prison, right? In which you'll have an ID number and everything will be tracked and all this and that's all conspiracy theory and whatever. But I give it 10 years and I have a pretty good track record of predicting these kinds of things. Okay. And so when you take it out of Utah and you realize that this is the worldwide network, all of a sudden they becomes identifiable and we know who to confront. We know what institutions need to be looked at. And we understand if we want to be free men and women, then we may have to give up some of our security that these people provide us, which they do. They do this tremendous job of building things and providing us with security, but we're no longer free. And so if we want to be free men and women, we may have to break away from these groups of people and give up our security in order to be free again. Okay. And that's kind of a weird way to end the show. But to wrap it all up, I mean, you have Gordon Bowen, who's a symptom of a much larger system of people who it makes sense that they don't care about abuse victims because that's not what they've been. They are abuse victims, right? To a lower level, but they are abuse victims and they don't care about the abuse. They don't see themselves as abuse victims. They see themselves as prominent members of a community who went through some experiences that were unpleasant, but they have no sympathy or empathy for people who've experienced other abuse. And so for me, this is a really great, not end to my journey, but it's a great stopping point in my journey to look back and say, wow, I started out this research to understand why the men and women that I was surrounded by acted the way that they did. And now I have a pretty good idea of why they did that. I have a pretty clear picture of why leaders in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints turn into corporate automatons when an abuse victim comes to them and asks for help. And it all has to do, it goes back to the leadership of the church, because these lower level leaders are just going to reflect what they see from their upper level leaders who've turned the church into a multi-billion-dollar international corporation. And those kinds of organizations don't care about abuse victims. Churches care about abuse victims. Corporations care about profits and branding. And it was Gordon Bowen who created the brand that the church leans on so heavily now and is in danger of losing if people find out about their 40-year relationship with Gordon Bowen.
You're absolutely right. And I really love the different perspectives that you bring to this because you have your research, but like I said in the intro, you humanize people at the same time. You're not out here to just dehumanize everybody. You're looking at all the different facets of a person. You don't just stop at, all these abuse allegations, let's just kill this person off, which maybe in some cases that's what we need to do. But you're always investigating, how does a person get from this little child that they were to a monster? How does somebody get there? What was that? And how does a person like that is this monster reported by 40 plus people allowed to be in a position of power? And how does he look so good on camera most of the time? How, and why do people trust a person like that? There's so many different facets to look at. And I really love that your research embodies that and that you're able to look at, okay, this person, this is their path and what they likely went through. This is where they are today. This is what people that know them or have been victimized allegedly by this person have said about them. And this is sort of what we can maybe conclude how they got there, why people respect them, kind of the cover personality versus what happens behind the scenes. And it is really important that we look at the circles that these people keep, because that's the other thing that a lot of the mainstream news does is they isolate a person that they are prosecuting or putting in jail. And so it looks like sort of this lone ranger that went out and caused a problem or preyed on somebody or abused somebody. And so you look at somebody and you're like, oh my gosh, what a horrible person. Thank goodness they're locked up. And what they don't tell us is that there's a whole network working with them. Doesn't matter if one person leaves that network. They got a whole system going that can operate with or without that person, and it's really important too that we're looking at the circles that these people keep and also how that enables abuse to continue happening. If somebody like Gordon Bowen grew up ever since he was a child being abused and having people in his own family enabling the abuse, even to the point of watching it, never stopping it, Then he grows up and is put in abusive situations, possibly a fraternity, something like that, like a lot of these leaders that you were talking about go through. Maybe they were bullied at school, and then they're put into continued situations where they have to perpetrate some type of abuse or corruption in order to climb. And if that's all that these people are surrounded with their whole life, and that's who they're climbing the ranks with, and like you said, following the leader of people before them, that was the example that they have to continue to follow, of course these people are going to be psychopaths. And it makes a lot of sense when you look at it that way. We almost have like two species of humans that are walking the earth. We have empathetic, caring people who genuinely care about their families and protect them, and go to work every day and have struggles. And then you sort of have this psychopathic parasite class that are doing things behind the scenes and then coming forward with kind of a cover that we see publicly and aren't able to conceptualize the person doing anything different behind the scenes. And your research is really important because it takes all those layers and dissects them and helps us see this big picture for what it is from a victim's perspective and what somebody went through around the person, all the way to who that person turned out to be, regardless of life circumstances, and the corruption that's happening behind the nice cover that we see here in society. And especially in a church system, you think about, and I'm sure like that's one of the first places that victims go to seek refuge when they are dealing with abuse. And if they're just running into the hands of abusers and people who are covering up abuse, people who are possibly abusers themselves that they're being confided in, it creates just this never-ending hamster wheel of abuse that never gets solved. It never gets served to the people responsible. And we just have this victimization cycle that keeps going, and it just keeps churning out more victims and survivors, and we're never going to understand this unless we look at it holistically, like what your research shows, and look at the big picture and everybody involved and all the different layers and the people's life stories, and it's hard because a lot of people are stuck on these TikTok videos where they just want to listen to 30-second clips to try to figure out what's going on in the world. And this is really, you look at, I can't even imagine how many hours of research that you have done since you started till now with all these different aspects. Like, you probably put in more work than a college student at this point, with your research. And so that's kind of why I tell people we have to look at this. This isn't just a little YouTube video that we watch. Like, this is literally like a college course that we all have to consciously want to engage in, to listen to all these different aspects, listen to all the people involved that can have different perspectives. And we have to treat it like a course where we're learning. It's not just something that we're all going to learn and understand right away, but it's really important what you're doing. And I just thank you with all my heart. Like I said, I can't imagine the hours that you've put in, some of the disappointments, the harassment that you've gotten, the turning down of opportunities to share this. Just honored to have you on, and that you have chose to keep going. And I know that there's a lot of survivors out there and people that are giving you research. They're doing that because they believe in you. We all believe in you, and are really, really grateful and honored to have you on the forefront of this movement. You really do give a voice to the voiceless, Justin.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm honored. I never envisioned this being a part of my life, but I am extremely grateful to my Lord and Savior for providing me the opportunity to meet so many wonderful people and work with so many wonderful people on something that I think is really critical to our future, and I hope that when people watch this, I hope they feel empowered. That's what I hope, because it's not about, there's a lot of people who think this is a holy war. And maybe it will be. And the scriptures talk about, the book of Revelation, and there's a lot of that, but there's a lot we can do before it gets to that, right? And we can choose to separate ourselves from these groups of people, and we can form communities that don't have people who've engaged in ritual shame, abuse and that kind of thing. We have choices still. We have a lot of options and opportunities ahead of us, and we can try to slowly rebuild this world that we want to live in, where churches prioritize humans over dollars, right? And so I hope that's the end result here, is that people feel empowered. Nothing has been more satisfying than the last couple months to see people contact the church office building on the phone or write a letter to them and express their concerns politely, it's not a word, politely, respectfully, right? But with a firm boundary to let their church know that this is not the type of behavior that we expect or will accept from the leadership of the church. And we're still not all the way where we want to be with this, because we need to get Gordon, like Gordon Bowen, I don't know where he's at in his life, but he shouldn't be working with the church. And so we need to get to a place where the church openly says, yes, we did this, but we are no longer doing it. And people need to understand that their voice can make a difference in that process. And nothing has been more rewarding than to see us start taking those first baby steps along that path of empowering people to use their voice to force change or to help make change in a peaceful manner with the church that they choose to engage with. That's been profoundly rewarding.
And it's rewarding for other people. I think a lot of people genuinely do want to help do something, but it seems so big. This snowball that we have to roll seems impossibly big. And a lot of people are already so stressed. They have families, they have bills, they're going to work, they're not sleeping. And then they're trying to save the world on top of that. And it's nice to know through people like you that it doesn't require that. You know, it actually would require very little if everybody stepped up and did something. We don't have to all personally save the world as individuals. If we all just chip in a little bit of time, a little bit of energy, you know, we can do a lot. And we've forgotten that. And they've made us forget that. You know, they've made us believe that they're the ones that can make the change, and that are the gatekeepers to all the decisions that we're allowed to engage in with our lives, you know. And it's really nice too that people like you are reminding people of who they are and who they forgot that they are. And, you know, with the Gordon Bowen story, it's crazy that somebody like him is still out in the public eye. What do you think in your mind it's going to take to potentially get him out of the church or prosecuted, or to get these victims that have already testified or ones that haven't spoke out heard?
Yeah, good question. So let's just start with the easiest one. I don't think there will ever be prosecutions here. I think probably my guess is that everything's outside the statute of limitations at this point, unless there's been abuse recently that we're not aware of. Okay. So I don't think you're going to see Gordon Bowen in jail. One of the things we didn't talk about is that Gordon Bowen is extremely good friends with Mitt Romney, who happens to live in the neighborhood in Utah called Holiday, where all of the Sigma Chi guys are. Okay. And so when you talk about Gordon Bowen and the firewall that he has behind him, you're talking about being supported by a man who was nearly the president of the United States and who's part of a secret society called the Alfalfa Club himself. The chance of seeing social justice inside of Gordon Bowen's life is probably not all that great either. But I think the place where we can make a difference is if people continue to politely and respectfully contact the church office building and feed them the data that we went through today and express their concern about the church doing business. And there's places to apply energy and there's places to remove energy. Okay. And this is going to be really controversial for members of the church. The places to apply energy are writing letters and making phone calls, talking to your bishop, talking to your stake president, talking to members of your congregation about this crazy story you heard about this guy. Disseminating the information is where we put our energy. What's going to make people really uncomfortable is because you're dealing with a corporation, there's two places to apply pressure. One is you stop giving them money. Okay. And that's already happening, you know, en masse in the church. People are stopping paying their tithing. They're not paying their tithing, not because of Gordon Bowen, but for other reasons. But if you feel so inclined, like I'm going to get myself in all kinds of trouble for saying this, but unfortunately, because of who you're dealing with, the very first thing that's going to motivate them is if they see the money dwindling. Okay. Now, inside the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, your tithing doesn't mean anything to them anymore because they have like $350 billion of assets, but it will send a message to them. And what the message sends is if they're not paying their tithing, they're not going to the temple. And if they're not going to the temple, then we're not doing what we need to do. So we need to look at what we're doing to bring people back into this system and this process where they're willing to pay their tithing so that they go to the temple and receive the ordinances that the church part of them wants you to do. The second place is you're going to hurt their brand. And you're going to go out and you're going to say, why is the church working with a man who stole money from them, abused their children, stole work from people who are a part of their church, caused members of the church to lose their livelihoods, Okay. Why are religious leaders, men who claim to be special witnesses of the name of Jesus Christ, not supporting victims and doing business with the wolf in sheep's clothing inside of their flock? And as that spreads, that might even be more effective than withdrawing your money, because the brand is what's most important, because the brand is what brings in new members who pay tithing and go to the temple. So the one thing that they really can't countenance is for this to go far and wide, because the more people that know about it, the worse their brand looks. And the worse their brand looks, the less people join the church. And the fewer people who join the church, the less tithing money they have and the less temples they can build. Which, by the way, guess who gets the temple building contracts? Sigma Chi members. Okay. Guess who gets to buy the houses around the temple that appreciate in value first? Sigma Chi members. Okay. So anyway, that was a diversion. I apologize for rabbit holing or for squirreling there. But those are the kinds of things where we can apply our energy and withdraw our energy. And as we do that, we engage in this back and forth that we're supposed to be engaging in. It's what free citizens do. It's what free agents do. We engage in back and forth with the people who claim authority over us. And sometimes we're willing to give to consent to them using their authority. And sometimes we have to say, you know what, you've gone too far. We no longer consent to this.
Yeah, we forget that they work for us ultimately, like they are authorities of citizens, but they're here to serve us. And that's what we're paying them to do and depending on them to do. We're not paying them to rule and enslave us and tell us what to do and dictate everything and control us. They're supposed to have our best interests in mind. And it's really important that we remember that, because this has gone on for so long. We've just kind of accepted as a society that this is just the way it is. There's supposed to be these controllers and rulers, and, we're not holding them accountable. But slowly but surely, people are starting to reflect on that and be like, wait a minute, this is really miserable that we're allowing this. And it's super abusive. And these people aren't very good people that are in these positions. They're not doing good things. We need to hold them accountable. And it is really important that people are reaching out, and that doesn't take a long time. And just to remind people, you actually have a letter that's already done on your website that people can just download and send. And I'm guessing they just have to sign it and send it and email it. But you already have all the resources available. You have all the information, and all people have to do is just follow it. It doesn't even take any energy or time hardly.
Yeah, that's where we're trying to make it as easy as possible, because we know it's a very difficult time to be alive. It's very hard to make ends meet. It's very hard to keep families together. And so we don't want this to be something that people have to spend inordinate amounts of time and energy to do. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible. And if people have other ideas about how it can be easier, I'd love to hear from them. You can contact me through GordonBowenCourtDocuments.com. And I'd love to have conversations about other ideas that people have. Certainly the best ideas have not come from me as it relates, especially to public pressure. I'm a researcher. I'm not necessarily like an advocate. I'm not an agitator. I'm not any of that kind of stuff. And so if people have ideas about how we can better spread this information, I would love to hear from you.
And that's the same website too, that the documentation and the directions for how to contact the people that Justin was talking about is on too. And I'm going to have that in the show notes for you guys. And did you want to share any other ways that people can connect with you or where you're on social media? And then, of course, if there's anything we didn't get to talk to that you wanted to close up with.
Yeah, so I'm at LDS Abuse on X. I did start up a TikTok recently. That's at LDS Abuse. I did. Yeah, I'm doing it. We're going for it.
Yeah, I gotta follow you there.
Like me. So it's at LDS Abuse on X. I couldn't get LDS Abuse on that platform. So at LDS Abuse on X is what I'm doing on TikTok. And then through email on the website. I'm happy when people contact me. I'll give you my phone number. We can hop on a call, and I love chatting with people. I spend a significant number of hours every week just talking to people and that kind of a thing. But yeah, no, happy to chat with anybody. So I don't think I have anything else, Emma. Thank you so much. I love coming on your show, especially because you give me so much freedom and so much latitude to talk about the things that are important to me that I think give us a holistic approach to how to do things. So just thank you so much for your friendship and for consistently bringing me back to have these conversations. I appreciate you.
Thank you too. I appreciate you. And I know my audience does. They always get so excited whenever you come on. And your research has just been so monumental with piecing together a lot of the stories that we hear from survivors and things that they don't necessarily understand or who have had time to research themselves. And I think what you're doing, it really paints a big picture. You can take what you're researching and apply it to any institution, religious or otherwise, and duplicate it and model it. And it's going to be the same type of structure, the same type of abusive, systematic structure that you have found and discovered within the LDS church, you know? And so I'm deeply grateful for your research and the fact that you haven't given up, and the fact that you've just been such a voice for people who can't speak out yet. And even for people who have, you know, to have people like you on the side and on the forefront, it's terrific. And I can't wait to do it again, and appreciate you sharing all of this here. I really hope that other podcasts pick it up. This is just tremendous. And especially
Ooh, somebody's upset.
I know my dog's agreeing with me. He thinks that you're wonderful.
There is one other thing, Emma. There's one other thing, sort of as a cliffhanger that we didn't talk about. I am in possession of 50 pages of documents that tie this directly up to the highest levels of the leaders of the church. And the reason I just want people to understand, the reason we don't release those is because we have what's called the law of self-preservation inside of abuse research. And if somebody gives us documents, but they feel like us releasing them would cause harm to them, whether it's financially, emotionally, mentally, physically, whatever, we always agree not to publish those documents. And right now, the people that I have received those documents from don't feel comfortable with us releasing, because it goes all the way to the very highest levels. I want people to know that we do have those documents, and there may come a time where we do release those. So definitely keep track of this story, because, you know, in the near future, maybe we might have the opportunity to sort of complete the circle on this and draw that line that shows that it goes all the way up to the very top of the church.
Wow, that's huge. And I definitely encourage people. Justin updates his Twitter pretty daily, and hopefully his TikTok too. And that's a really great way you guys can sort of keep up with this. But I ask everybody to just pray over all of this, pray over Justin, pray over all the people that he speaks to behind the scenes that can't yet be public, and pray that he gets the space and the opportunity to share, and that we can expose this even further, because this really does go to the top. And you know, it's something that has infected all of society, and we really need to come together and put an end to it and expose it and help the people that have been affected by it. And it's going to start with people like Justin helping us understand, and all of you on the other side doing your part to take action, whether that's a skill that you have that you can contribute to the movement, whether that's sharing posts of people like Justin who are sharing on social media, listening and sharing podcasts like this. You know, you guys are really the backbone. You guys are what helps propel this. You know, we can start a little snowball, and we need all of you guys to help us roll it up the hill and down and up and down. And we really couldn't do this without you guys. And so I'm going to have all of Justin's information in the show notes. Like I said, please reach out to him if you're a survivor as well of any of the names that he has talked about. If you guys are somebody in Utah who can help be boots on the ground, if you're somebody who has additional information, if you want to help research, there's so many different ways that you guys can help, and we can definitely use it. It takes a lot of time and energy to do this. So if you guys have any ability to help whatsoever, please reach out to Justin and follow him on social media. Help share and elevate his posts. Sometimes it's really hard to get the algorithm to pick up this information for obvious reasons. So your help is really valued with that. I'm going to have all my information as well below. Please follow me on every platform, as I never know where I'm going to be censored as well. And just thank you guys deeply with all my heart for being voices yourselves for the voiceless, and just for caring and supporting and listening. It means so much that you guys care to witness. And so with that being said, thank you guys for listening. God bless you all, and we will see you next time.